Hey everybody, and welcome to Vassals of Kingsgrave. We have a special Pride Month episode for you that we are titling Rainbowcast. I am QueenJames, and today I am joined by Katie.
This is Katie, Lady Griffin on the forums.
And David.
David HHH on the forums. Hi.
All right, so today we wanted to just bring you some gay history and also just talk on some topics that are more current and in current pop culture. And we want to start by bringing you some information on the upstairs lounge fire. And with that, we have Katie.
Sure. So I actually had never heard of this until Pulse happened a few years ago, when people started bringing up the fact that prior to Pulse, the largest, I don't know how to phrase this, like the deadliest attack on an LGBT group in the United States was a 1973 arson attack on a gay bar called the Upstairs Lounge in New Orleans. The Upstairs Lounge was a gay club in the French Quarter of New Orleans. It was located on the second floor of a corner building with a narrow staircase leading up to its door, lending the bar its name. It was known to serve a mostly working-class clientele, including members of the local chapter Metropolitan Community Church, the first pro-LGBT Christian denomination in the United States. On Sunday, June 24, 1973, Roger Nunez, a notorious hustler and patron of the local gay bars, was ousted from the Upstairs Lounge for harassing other patrons. Nunez was heard to say that he was going to burn everyone in the bar alive. A drunken man fitting Nunez's description was shortly thereafter seen buying lighter fluid from a local Walgreens. A man of similar description was witnessed spraying the lighter fluid on the bottom steps of the Upstairs Lounge and tossing a match before fleeing. The fire, trapped in the narrow staircase, quickly became an inferno. As the flames spread all the way up to the door of the lounge, they began to eat through the circuitry of the buzzer, causing it to malfunction. Inside the bar, bartender and bar manager Buddy Rasmussen heard the buzzer ringing and asked his friend Luther Boggs to get the door. When Boggs opened the door, the fire surged across the ceiling and floor with the power of a flamethrower, the backdraft leaping 40 feet across the room to engulf a crowd of patrons who had been singing around the piano. The flames quickly spread and chaos ensued. Buddy Rasmussen grabbed a flashlight and quickly commanded half of the patrons to an exit at the back of the bar. Other patrons, intoxicated and panicked, fled towards the windows. Some managed to break the glass and leap onto the sidewalk. Others found themselves trapped against windows with iron burglar bars, roasted between the open flames and hot rebar. Other patrons huddled near the bar's back corner where the heat turned the room into a blast furnace. Molten styrofoam dripped onto their heads from the ceiling and the soles of their shoes melted. Smoke inhalation caused many to faint and choke. Onlookers outside the bar could see the trapped patrons stacked against the windows as they screamed for help. When firemen finally subdued the flames and were able to make their way inside, they found piles of bodies stacked in mounds against the windows. Seasoned firefighters were reported to have broken down and vomited at the sights and smells that assailed them. The fire only lasted 16 minutes, but in that time, 28 people died, with 4 other people dying of injuries in the weeks to follow. Among the dead were MCC Reverend Bill Larson, whose body was photographed in the days to come as it was left in a window open to the elements at the front of the Upstairs Lounge. From the start, police investigation of the arson revealed a deep lethargy and disinterest in solving the case. Roger Nunez, despite a staggering amount of evidence against him, including admissions of guilt to family, to friends and lovers, was only half-heartedly pursued by police and escaped custody twice, evading capture entirely until his suicide in 1974. The press, after 2 days of coverage, lost interest in the fire. Relatively no news outlet mentioned the fact that the bar was a gay bar, and many radio hosts and television personalities made light of the fire. No official condolences was made by either the mayor of New Orleans or the governor of Louisiana, despite the fact that the lounge fire was the deadliest fire in the city's history. No calls for blood donation were made by state officials, no day of mourning was declared, no victim fund created, no public memorial enacted, no city representation was made at private funerals. Many of the patrons who died in the fire, their gay status solidified by their presence in the lounge, were refused burial by churches and rejected by family members who refused to claim the bodies. The survivors of the fire were interviewed on the condition that they could only stand in front of cameras with their backs turned so as to not risk losing their jobs, families, and homes by being outed. One of the few institutions to give condolences for the fire was the Episcopal Church led by Reverend William P. Richardson, who gave a small prayer service for the deceased, only to be castigated by his bishop and shamed by his parishioners. In 1998, on the 25th anniversary of the fire, a memorial service was organized, and members of the local MCC laid down a memorial plaque at the former site of the Upstairs Lounge Club. The fire, though not recognized at the time by major media outlets and not recognized by the state and local governments, it became a galvanizing event for the local gay community in New Orleans. I basically learned about this first, like I said, by reading Pulse, but then it made me seek out Tinderbox by, God, let me look up his name real quick, by Robert Feisler, which if you want to read a book that gets you really incandescently angry, it's worth picking up, because it's definitely like a chapter of gay history that I would say even today, like, most people just do not know about. The first half of the book is really about establishing the community and what the community was like in New Orleans at the time, as well as the patrons and the locals who flocked to the bar. And the second half of the book is really about the complete and utter failure of police, state officials, city officials to really do anything about in the aftermath of the fire, except feel deep embarrassment and discomfort about the fact that a bunch of gay people got burned up in a building. Have either of you read this book, or have you all heard about this before?
This is the first time hearing of it, and it's actually horrifying. I had no idea that anything like this ever happened. I had never heard of it before you brought it up, and then hearing your account of it. I mean, it's definitely something that I'm surprised, more people haven't talked about.
What about you, David?
Sorry, I'm back. I'd heard of it, but that's about it. I didn't know much about it, to be honest.
It's crazy because reading the book, you realize just how much the criminalization of homosexuality and general homophobia, how much it stymied bureaucratic and police investigation process,
right.
Because survivors couldn't talk about it with the press. Police had no formal training with dealing with gay people outside of arresting them. And basically, the climate of fear, or of homophobic fear, was such that even straight people, it was just like, you couldn't talk about it without fear of being associated with it in some way. There was a straight woman who was friends with a gay man. She survived the fire with minimal burns, but she still lost her job for it because it was assumed since she was there that she was gay, and therefore her job at a real estate firm was replaced. And it was just like, it's kind of mind-blowing, where it was just like, because it was a building full of gay people, the climate was basically, well, they're criminals, they got what they deserved, why should we feel sorry about this? There's a small detail that when the police were investigating the ruins of the bar, they stole all the money out of the cash register.
Of course.
Yeah.
I
mean, at the time, like, these were police officers that were routinely taking bribes from gay clubs anyway, so, why not steal money out of the register? And also, there's a lot of details in the book that are really reminiscent of, later events in gay history, about the fact that, like, the community, like, there was a lot of grassroots organizing for survivor funds and, like, medical donations and, calls for days of mourning. But also there was a lot of people in the community who were furious that attention was being drawn to it, because it was like a laser beam was being pointed at their backs. It's like, this will affect our business. We're going to be outed for this. Like, we just need to keep our heads down and not talk about it for fear of retaliation, which is something that shows up, like, even, like, more in my lifetime is when I remember, like, marriage equality fight, where it's like,
Yeah.
You have half the community that's like, yes, we need to be seen and we need to fight as hard as we can. And
Mm-hmm.
the other half is like, if we fight, we're going to get hurt.
Right. Well, I mean, that's certainly everything we saw during the entire AIDS crisis, you know. People were like, shh, just be nice and take what we can get, and others like act up, and others were fighting and saying, no, we're dying and we need the country to do more. You know, and then of course the lesbians were chief in that, standing up for their gay brothers, and it was a crazy time.
Mm-hmm.
But we see this all through history where, you know, some people are like, shh, let's just hope it gets better, and you know, usually anything good that comes out of this comes from the community itself, you know.
Mm-hmm. It's also the curse of the curse and blessing of the closet is like, if you have a place to hide, you know, it can save your life, but it can also give you an excuse not to work in your own best interest.
Yep.
Was the attack was carried out by a straight person, or was that man there because he was gay as well, or was that ever really experienced?
He was gay. At the there were a lot of rumors at the time that like it was a hate crime that was the primary suspicion within the community, but it was pretty clear from day one that everyone knew who had been at the bar and knew who had done it. And it's actually just crazy, like how many times this guy got away and how much police just did not care, to the point that he showed up at the site of the fire as the firefighters were hosing down the building, and the bartender recognized him, remembered what he said, grabbed him, dragged him over to a police officer, and was like, he did it, you need to arrest him. And the police officer was just like, move along.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Well, I mean, you see this a lot through history of, you know, a lot of the people who attack the community are closet cases fighting their own, you know, inner oppression. And you see this all along. I mean, many of the attacks on especially the larger ones on the community were like that. And there were a couple that weren't. I mean, there was, I don't know if you remember back in 97, there was a bombing in Atlanta, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a bombing. Yeah, it was a bombing in a gay bar, and they targeted, you know, us, and then they also, I think, targeted abortion clinics because it was a right-wing crazy. That's one of the few times I think it hasn't been one of us, you know, which is
Robert Rudolph,
sick.
Is that who you're talking about?
I think
Eric Robert
Eric
Rudolph.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody in Georgia knows his name because, like, the whole year of that bombing, that's like every news report was Eric Robert Rudolph. Where is he? And it turns out he was living in the woods eating green beans for a decade.
Oh my God.
Is he in jail now, I hope?
Yeah, I think he might have died. I need to look this up.
I was going to say, like, everyone, all these people who do this stuff end up dead.
Yeah. He's one of the few cases, like, he didn't kill himself afterwards. He just, like, no, he's apparently still alive.
Yeah.
I don't remember. Caught in 2005. Yeah, that was a big deal in Georgia because he was the Olympic Park bomber.
And I mean, I guess I could understand back in the 70s that this didn't get that much media coverage, but I'm just surprised that after Pulse that this wasn't brought up more. I know you said that this is how you kind of initially researched it, but like I said, this is the first time I'm hearing of this. I didn't even know it was a thing, and of course, being someone who's quote unquote younger in the gay community, even though I'm knocking on 30's door, I'm just surprised that, you know, there wasn't more coverage, or there wasn't, like, 27 people died. You said 28?
Yeah.
32, I think. I think it was initially 28, and then 4 people died from their wounds later. They lingered. Yeah,
in like a matter of 15 to 20 minutes. That's just, I mean, that's an extinction right there. That was insane.
Yeah. It just goes to the fact that at the time, in addition to being criminalized, it was like, it's only been very recently that people have stopped seeing homosexuality as a bad thing that heterosexuals do. You know, that at the time that gay people were in league with,
as an action.
Right. That, like, they're doing something bad, they got caught doing something bad, and they burned alive while doing it. So, you know, no one's...
This was right around the same time that homosexuality was considered a medical disorder, right? It was a mental disorder. It had a medical diagnosis.
Yeah, it got...
I think it was like 74.
Yeah, it got... It's in the book. It's like a few years after the fire, it actually gets I don't know the correct word, like decommissioned by the American Psychological Institute as a mental illness. But it also speaks to the fact that like the people who recorded this history, I mean, Robert Feisler, this book only came out a few years ago, but he draws a lot of sources from people in the community and survivors and, local historians. But for the most part, one of the key problems of the queer movement is, history is very difficult to pass down in this community. So as a result both of, I think, the climate of the time, the indifference of the city, and just also the structural problems of gay people not being able to, except with, extreme effort, pass down history to children and future generations. It doesn't surprise me. Well, it does. It doesn't surprise me that it's underreported, I guess. I don't know, it's really anomalous of like how horrible this was, and yet how like you just don't hear about it ever.
You were saying before it's hard to, I guess, pass down this knowledge or these stories within the gay community, and I even know, just in a smaller aspect, I guess there's something called Drag Queen Story Hour, where I guess at different public libraries throughout the country that drag queens will come in and read stories to kids about how it's okay to be yourself, and if you're a boy it's okay to wear a dress and things like that. And there are these people coming out now that are kind of basically banning those in all these public libraries and saying that drag queens can't come in and you can't educate the children. But I mean, it's not like they're talking about anything sexual or talking about anything bad. They're just basically talking about how acceptance is key, and they're still getting banned. So I could only imagine that freaking 20 something years ago, even having any gay person near a child was probably just seen as something terrible. Or I also think that there's a correlation between homosexuality and pedophile, which is horrible, but again, that's what straight people, I think, sometimes see, or people from outside of our community.
Right, and that's rooted in the, God, what is it called? The theory of like gay recruitment or whatever, that like gay people have to recruit into their numbers because statistically we just do not have children.
Right, which I think it's funny. I've seen different memes and things like that basically says like, well, straight people are the ones who are making gay people. So
yeah, that is like that association between like queer people and pedophiles is so deeply ingrained in the culture, especially I think more so I think with gay men and trans people. Like I'm sure there's like, because you can see it definitely like tracing back to the 60s and even the 50s and the 70s, this idea that somehow that sexual, quote unquote, sexual perverts are like others, like they have to be like other sexual, quote unquote, well, one is a pervert, one is not.
Right. Yeah, but
right.
Definitely making a correlation, this person is different sexually, so obviously I'm going to lump them in with this whole group of people that we would consider terrible people,
It's it's also, like I said, it's only been very, very recently that homosexuality is seen as something that you are, not something that you do.
Hey guys.
Hey David.
Hey David.
Sorry, my internet keeps dying. I'm actually right now I'm tethering to my phone. I don't know how much data I'm going to use, but whatever. We'll figure it out. Okay. Sorry, my home internet's been really unreliable this week, which is really annoying. Sorry.
That's all right. We will.
What did I miss? I'm sorry, real quick.
We were just...
So I don't repeat you. So I don't repeat what you were saying.
No, we were just talking about the problems of passing down queer history within the community when for a community that structurally and statistically just does not have that many children, does not have that many queer children, and how that might have contributed to the fact that this incident got lost in the shuffle of history.
Right. I mean, it's true, because the story I'm going to tell in a little bit is something that like no one even has heard of that I know of these days.
I'm done with my topic.
Yeah.
So,
Well, then I think then we'll move on to my topic. I wanted to talk about Martha P. Johnson and Stonewall. I did not put together a beautiful summary like you did. I kind of just have some bullet points of things that I wanted to mention that I figure we would just talk about it. Stonewall was a 2-day riot that happened starting on June 28th, 1969 at about, I think, 1:30 a.m. Pretty much what happened was the Public Moral Squad, which was a section of the New York City Police Department, went into one of the more popular bars, which was the Stonewall Inn, basically to shut it down for that night, which was not necessarily unheard of at that time. There were a lot of raids on gay bars and things like that. Pretty much they would just kick people out for the night. Things would resume the next day, but I guess tensions were getting higher, and at this point the patrons of the Stonewall were just not having it this one particular night. They started to riot, and I guess a lot of people were held inside the bar, but as people were getting thrown out, a crowd started on the outside of the bar. I think the first night of the riot, there was a little over 100 people outside protesting and starting chants and things like that. And then I guess by the second day, I think it got up to 500 to 600 people outside the bar. I do know that at one point, police were barricaded themselves inside. And there's also there's two people that evidently started this or sparked the gay rights movement, and one of them is Martha P. Johnson. The other one is, I have trouble pronouncing her name, but it's Stormy Day, it's something French, Stormy Day Laverie. So they say that Martha P. Johnson threw a shot glass through a mirror. Other people say it was a brick at a cop. There's a lot of theories about what happened, or disputes about how Martha was involved. Martha said that she wasn't necessarily there at the time that the riot started, that she got there around 2 a.m., which was about a half hour after. So some people say that maybe she wasn't involved at all, but Stormy was involved. She was being taken out of the bar in handcuffs. At this time, people had to wear at least 3 garments of clothes that were assigned to their gender. And I believe that Stormy was dressed in more male clothes than was allowed. And so she was being taken out in handcuffs and put into a back of a cop car. But from what I read, there were multiple escape attempts where she got loose of cops and started fleeing and was taken again. So I guess she started screaming at the crowd that was outside the bar, basically saying, you're going to do nothing, which I guess sparked more people to start revolting against the cops. I think she was eventually arrested that night, but not without giving up a hell of a fight.
I heard a story of a parking meter got uprooted and thrown through either the window of the bar or the wagon or something.
Yeah, I heard that the parking meter was used as a battering ram at the front door.
Yeah, one of
to
those.
Get them
yeah,
back in.
Yeah, I have definitely heard that Marcia climbed up a lamppost and dropped a brick through a cop car windshield.
Yes.
So
I think some of this may be legend, but
yeah, like not to be super crass, but there's an element of like Song of Ice and Fire, and that there's like 5 different versions of the same.
Right. Yeah.
Like she flew away, and Superwoman.
Exactly, and then she warged into a wolf and attacked the police. But there's definitely different accounts of what happened, and some of them do not mesh with one another. But just the fact that we know that Martha was involved, and then after Stonewall, she also did a lot of activism work up until her death in 1992. But she was a co-founder of STAR, which was the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, which I guess was a small group of trans women or drag queens who put together different protests and things like that. And she also, I think it's funny here. She performed with a group called the Hot Peaches, which I guess before her activism work, she liked obviously performing at different bars and things. So she performed with a singing group called the Hot Peaches, which were other trans women who I guess would probably travel to different bars singing. Unfortunately, she did die on July 6th, 1992, or at least around then. I guess the actual date of her death may be unknown, but she was found floating in the Hudson River. People said that she was, I guess the cops said that she was suicidal, and that I think they ruled it as a suicide. But it was found that she did have a wound in the back of her head, which, nobody really knows necessarily how she died. Some people did say that they heard a man a couple days later bragging about how he killed a drag queen named Martha. But no one was ever caught. No one was ever indicted for her murder. And I think back in 2012, they opened a cold case file on her murder. But again, nothing was ever done with it. A couple other interesting things is she did model for Andy Warhol and his Ladies and Gentlemen Polaroids. So I think she's just a pretty fascinating figure. She was definitely a person who was out on the street, definitely marginalized, but seemed to make the best out of her shitty situation, and always stayed true to who she was, which I think for our gay community, that's, fantastic that someone back in the 60s was standing up for themselves.
Have y'all ever seen newspaper headlines about the riots, contemporary? It's hilarious because some of them are like 4 cops injured by rowdy protesters.
Oh, that's what they do. That's what they do.
Yeah. The media definitely was not in favor of gay people at this point. I saw something that there was it was similar to what you just said. There was another newspaper article basically villainizing people at Stonewall and praising the police for shutting it down.
Of course. Well, I mean, if you think about it, these were the rowdy people causing trouble. They were, not happy being arrested for their criminal activity. That's how the media is going to see things. It's awful. I mean, we saw that through the AIDS crisis. We see it all the time. You see it with protesters today. We think of them as people fighting for their rights, or even people like overseas. But to the locals, they're troublemakers, and
Don't trust the police.
Or the media, or the media always.
I also wanted to touch on, what do you guys think about this other figure, Stormy? I haven't heard much about her. Whenever you read about Stonewall, you read about Martha P. Johnson, and I guess this was another person who fought back.
I actually don't know. I recognize the name, but shamefully, Marsha P. Johnson is really the person that I'm familiar with coming out of this, but I do know that there were other women, mostly who were, sex workers and people who we would today consider to be transgender on the front lines. But I don't really know much about her. I have heard that story about there was a woman being dragged away by the police, and that was what galvanized people within the bar to get out of the bar and fight back. But did she go on? Do you know if she went on and did anything afterwards, or?
I did. I had an article up on her. She did some, I think, activism work, but not that much. But I do know, she lived a long life. She didn't die until 2014. I think she was born in 1920. So, she was definitely... She died at 93.
She's is this the woman who used to carry the baseball bat around the lesbian part of town and the guardian of the lesbians? I feel like hang on, on the...
She may be. There's something here that says that she's the gay community's Rosa Parks.
Yeah.
And
I think one of the things I think to remember is that there's when you have a thing like this that was unorganized and random and chaotic, no one really, there's not going to be any one story of what happened, and so it all becomes like legend, and everyone turns I heard that, it becomes the game of telephone. And realistically, a lot of times at these things, especially since this wasn't an organized, planned thing, most of these people were not activists. They weren't people who were like planning on doing anything. It just sort of happened. So 99% of the people who were there like never went on to do anything, quote unquote important that we would say that we would know about. And, various people have said, oh, I'm a veteran of Stonewall, and some were and some aren't telling the truth. And, we'll probably never have any, remotely definitive story of what happened. And Martha's kind of come up as kind of the, the spokeswoman. Everyone, you need to have like one hero of every story, right? So that's sort of what she's become. And, maybe she was, maybe she wasn't. We'll never know. And it doesn't really matter in the end. But, that's sort of what happens with legends,
She definitely went on to do, plenty of activism work.
Right, she did.
Yeah.
Which is probably why she's remembered. There's probably people who did more than her who, then went on to do, nothing that, that we would say is of note, but hopefully lived lives.
Did y'all ever see the terrible movie? The guy who did Independence Day, Roland Emmerich. He did the Stonewall movie a few years ago.
I did not. I did not watch it. Was it bad?
It was
the tone of your voice.
Well, it has when the riots happen, it has this like white gay twink pick up a brick and scream "gay rights" and then throw it at the cops.
Right.
And it's like okay.
It's told through like the point of view of some like Midwestern closet case who just happened to be there, like that kind of thing. Yeah.
Like a white kid, and it's like.
Right, when
that's
it was
definitely
a trans woman of color.
Yeah, the whitewashing of that's definitely been a problem from the start. But
like, I think that's also a lot of why, it took time for the community to get excited about this, because let's face it, this was all the people who the mainstream gay community was embarrassed by. You had the trans, and you had the radical bull dykes, and you had the prostitutes, and the people that we don't like to put forward. And that was one of the great ironies of Pride, is that it celebrates Stonewall, and the very people who made Stonewall happen got marginalized in the community. Even at Pride, especially the early Pride parades, people would say, "Yo, don't let the drag queens march, don't let the bull dykes," and they sparked the movement.
Yeah. There's a reason why trans activism is like 20 years behind, LG and B activism, and that's largely the fault of cisgender queer people who just kept relegating trans people to the margins.
Well, we always wanted to be acceptable. That was the big problem. And that was a problem that, activism in general thought, like radical activism, particularly the street activism of ActUp and Queer Nation and other groups, was attacked by the community. When I was involved in it, I'd go to bars and wear like a Silence Equals Death shirt or something like that. And people would walk up to me in bars and say, like, why are you causing trouble? Why are you making things worse for us? I'm like, our community's dying. How much worse do you think it's going to get if you do nothing? Mm-hmm. That was one of the toughest parts of being in activism back then was, unless you were in New York where there was a huge critical mass of people who were involved, if you were an activist in Austin, Texas, or in New Orleans or Boston, you got crap from our own community, more than you got even from like the straight press or whatever. Even some of the gay papers would like make us look bad. It was really bad.
Yeah. Well, that was part of being within the Reagan 80s, right? If you didn't talk about it, if it wasn't in the media, it wasn't a problem, and you just don't say anything.
AIDS changed all that because it forced everyone out of the closet. That was the weird thing about our history, is that like the worst thing that ever happened to us sparked everything to move forward, because we didn't have any choice. We had to be visible. We were dying, and it was just a complete change in everything. And then when activists started fighting back, everyone else was like, "Shh, we don't want the spotlight. Go away." It's like, well, you're dying.
Yeah. Well,
that was always the thing that blew my mind about like the early days of the marriage equality movement, is just how many gay people came out and said like, no, we don't want this. We don't want rights for our part of our unions. We don't want, the 200 something odd rights that come with being married. And it was like, are you out of your mind? And it took me a long time to realize that a huge part of that resistance came from fear of retaliation and because like before marriage, like the last time there had been like a huge civil rights case, I mean, like, this is pre-Lawrence v. Texas, but, like, it was Bowers v. Hardwick, and
Right.
the community was punished viciously for taking it to the Supreme Court.
Yep.
So it's like, on one level, I understand where that resistance comes from. It's so frustrating.
Well, I mean, it's all that internalized homophobia too. I think for many, there's a feeling of we don't deserve it. Like, we are dirty, we are bad. I mean, isn't that where all the, like, a lot of the bashings come from, is closet cases? The closet is, I don't think people realize how utterly oppressive the closet is to everyone. It hurts everyone, and it affects everyone because it's so pernicious, and that's exactly what they wanted. One of the things activists back then and even today are saying is the single most powerful thing you can do as an activist is come out, because that changes the world. We said back in, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and before, people said, as more people come out, it will change everything. I mean, I'm just 30 years ago, the thought of marriage equality wouldn't even enter our minds. Like, it was that fantasy dream in the wonderful world that'll never happen. And yet we did it because we made it happen.
Yeah. I feel like being in the closet made me psychotic.
Everyone.
Yeah, it definitely, like, destroyed a lot of relationships that I had in my life, and I didn't really understand why at the time until after I came out, and I was like, oh, it was actually just hell. I just didn't realize it because I'd always been in hell.
See, I think my experience is slightly different with the closet, because by the time that I realized my sexual identity and who I was, I feel like times maybe progressed a little bit. So I feel like my closet had windows. Like, I didn't feel like I was trapped. I could watch TV and see a gay character and, feel like I'm not the only person out there that is gay. And then, my coming out wasn't really even coming out. It was basically just, I didn't sit people down and say, I am gay. It was more of just like, I just started talking about boys, and it
Right.
wasn't like a major process like it used to be, I don't think, or at least for me in particular in the region that I come from. I mean, I was living in the northwest suburbs of Chicago, so it was a pretty progressive place.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I don't know. Like, can I ask where you live? Like, what state or city, James?
Yeah, I'm in Chicago, or I'm in the suburbs of Chicago still. I just moved much further north. I'm about an hour outside the city, but I've always been a Chicago city boy until very recently.
Yeah.
That's one of the funny side effects of the marriage equality movement was, when I was younger, all the queers moved to the big cities. If you lived in Maine, you moved to Boston, or you moved to New York, maybe Portland. You would never, like, live in the burbs. And now, like, that we've got equality and that things are better, we're now all moving out to the suburbs and, like, joining the rest of the world, at least once you come out, and that's a big difference. It's kind of funny how we're going out instead of coming in.
Yeah. I still think coming out, I mean, I only asked just, like, out of curiosity, because it's kind of an irrelevant question, because obviously, like, where you live doesn't mean that you're not going to necessarily face a bad family reaction or a bad peer reaction. I think growing up in Atlanta, I grew up in Marietta, which is like white flight Trump capital of Georgia, where it's like, this is like Southern Baptist evangelical country. And it's like, I've lived here all my life pretty much. And the first time I saw two people, like same gender people, holding hands in public was when I visited a friend in Massachusetts, like a couple of years ago. Before that, like, the thought of like seeing two people, like two men or two women, hold hands is just unthinkable. And it's not even necessarily that there's like especially since marriage equality has kind of driven the homophobes to be a little more cautious publicly about what they say. And so now that they've lost the fight for, obviously they turned their ire on trans people now, but they've lost the marriage equality fight, and so they've kind of gone underground. But there's still like this culture of silence and invisibility that I think can really like fuck with your head if you don't push back against it.
Right. I mean, we're certainly not there yet, but I mean, I don't think you can even imagine how different it is today from just 30 years ago. I mean, I think one of the most vital things the community did was fight for media visibility. You know, that was, I think, you know, for all that ACT UP and Queer Nation and other activist groups did, probably the biggest thing we did was get in the freaking newspapers and on TV. Because just seeing gay people, I mean, I don't think you understand. Like, I mean, there was a time when people really didn't get that Liberace was gay because you just didn't think that this was real people, that people did this. Okay, maybe there's Liberace, but, you know, not my kid, not my cousin, not the girl next door, not whatever. And that's really was like one of the biggest things we fought for. Because, I mean, like it or not, TV and the movies is how we view the world. So you had, you know, Gay and GLAAD, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, and Queer Nation did a big part of pushing the media, and there were certainly lots of closeted queers in the media, to do the right thing. You know, I mean, Ellen, you know, changed everything. You know, all of those, you know, movies, TV shows, that changes everything. The idea of, you know, there being a gay superhero, like, or a gay character on a TV show just wasn't thought of. If it was a serial killer. It was, you know, it was someone dying of AIDS. It was a gay bashing victim. It was never like, hey, we're just a couple next door and, you know, whatever. And yeah. That's a massive change because the idea now, like you said, James, like you'd sort of talk to your family about boys and people were all like, yeah, that's James. That's how it is. And that thought wasn't even a concept just 30 years ago.
Right. Yeah, I mean, even just since watching TV, there's always been, you know, you turn on MTV as a kid and there's always that at least one gay character on Real World, you know, and there was always a presence in media for
and that was revolutionary. And that was revolutionary.
Right, which for me, as, you know, I was born in 1990, so it's like it was almost normal for me. You know, Ellen came out on national TV when I was still in elementary school, and so I didn't even really understand who I was or what being gay was before she already broke that barrier. So I just think, you know, growing up in a different time, we definitely face different struggles now, but certainly not as violent, I'd say, or as hard as a time as you may have had.
I mean, it's not easy for everyone, but
no, it really it depends. Like, obviously, like there are some communities where things have not changed at all. You know, I don't know if I would be any more, like, the only reason, I mean, I'm 30, so I'm not actually that much older than you, James. But like, if I was in high school now, I don't know if I would necessarily be comfortable coming out any more than I was, you know, 12 years ago, 15, I don't know. When did I graduate? I don't know. However long ago it was. But yeah, I mean, like, in evangelical land, like, very little has changed. Like, in, like, ultra-conservative religious communities, I don't think very much has changed.
Right.
It really,
yeah.
But you know what's changed everything is the internet, you know, and TV. Because you know what? That gay kid in evangelical hell still can turn on the TV and see himself or something at least resembling himself all over the TV.
Or just go on Twitter.
And exactly, go on Twitter can go on Twitter and maybe see you, you know, or me or whatever, can go on YouTube and see literally hundreds of LGBT people putting their stories out there. I mean, the internet really the two things that changed everything really were the media and the internet, because you know, when I was a kid, I was alone. You don't have to be alone today unless, you know, you're kept from the internet somehow, you know, because at least no matter how lonely you feel, there's someone out there you can talk to. That's a huge, huge sea change. And that, to me, has really is what's caused the political change. I think the political change comes after the social change. We didn't get marriage because, you know, there was lobbying going on. We got marriage because people saw Ellen on TV and said, do I want to take Ellen's marriage away? You know, and because people like you were able to come out because of the society we created. You know, this was something that, you know, maybe wasn't written down on paper, but was a very strategic fight people had. I was very involved in pushing the media into it, you know, into putting more visibility, because I knew long term that would change everything. And as a result, we were wildly successful. I mean, we could talk about things aren't perfect, and, you know, we could talk about the downsides of everything that have happened since then. But the world, I mean, how many social changes have been that massive in just a couple of decades?
Yeah, it's an unprecedented, like, change. Like it went from there was like a 20% shift of approval for marriage equality, like within like 10, maybe even 5 years. Like
I
it was.
mean, in 1988, I was arrested just trying to get a equal rights law, an anti-discrimination law in Massachusetts. We were the second state to pass it. That was, I mean, think about how recently that was, and now we have marriage. Like, just a couple of decades, we went from it being hugely controversial to say I shouldn't be able to fire you, to we're going to give you full equality. Now, the irony is that 22 states still don't have.
Yeah, I was about to say Georgia doesn't have
rights
that
laws.
shit.
Right. But, half the country doesn't. Pretty much none of the red states, except for Utah, which has a like clause in it that you can drive a truck through. It's so big. Basically, you could just say, "Oh, it's my religion," and you can discriminate. So pretty much none of the red states have it, and we don't have a federal law. I mean, hopefully next time we have the Democrats take over the Senate and the presidency, we will have an equal rights law because everyone supports it these days. It's over 80% approval, but it's not going to happen currently.
Yeah, that was the failure of the Colorado wedding cake cases. That was supposed to be the landmark case that would decide once and for all that you can't use your
Right.
quote unquote First Amendment religious rights, which people misinterpret wildly for what's actually in the Constitution, but you can't use that to discriminate in private businesses, and apparently like that just it didn't work out. It fell through.
Right. Well, never mind even that. I mean, just employment and housing is so crucial because, you can't, I can understand why you wouldn't want to come out. You could lose your job. And I mean, even in states where it's illegal, I mean, there's always ways around it. Oh, you were 2 minutes late for work. Sorry, you're fired. Just having that law in the book says something about us as a culture. And that's one of the reasons we fought for it. That was actually my first arrest, was at the State House fighting for the gay rights law. And we got it as a result. It took a couple of years, but it was basically, we had to literally chain ourselves into the Senate gallery to get our rights, but we got it.
David, I'm going to need your full biography of activism because this is actually really interesting.
Well, why don't I start to tell my story then, because it's kind of cool. Hopefully, I hope you'll appreciate it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think we should we'll get into David's activism here. How did you wanted to introduce it by talking about pride?
Well, I'll try to since we're talking about pride, I'll kind of like do it through the mirror of pride. So I have my family basically ran away from home and moved to Florida right after I graduated high school and basically abandoned me. And I wasn't quite out yet, but I came out shortly after, and that kind of was like, we kind of ignored the issue after that. And eventually my mom died and my father remarried, and I've never talked to them since. So I'm on my own in Boston, a gay kid living alone and a mess. And I joined up with Bagley, which is a gay youth group, back in the days where we just said the G and L words, letters instead of the other letters of the rainbow. And I joined up pretty quickly, like a month or two after I was on my own. So that helped. And my first Pride was the next year in '87. I marched with Bagley. But I was kind of looking for something more because that was just sort of a social group. I had that anger from being abandoned and all that and had nothing going on. And we had the AIDS crisis going on around us. So I went that year in '87 was the second March on Washington for lesbian and gay rights. Again, back when we just LNG'd it. I went there looking for like some radicalization and was kind of disappointed with the march because it was fairly milquetoast. But the day after, there was a civil disobedience at the Supreme Court, which was protesting that Hardwick versus Bowers decision that Katie mentioned earlier. That was what I was looking for. I mean, I saw all these brave lesbians, gays, bis, trans people just coming out and saying, no, you can't do this to us. And like well over 100 people were arrested. There were just waves of people. There was a whole ton of ActUp people there. And I almost jumped over the barricades and joined in. I was yes, I found what I'm looking for, And actually, you should never do that because there's a whole, people don't realize behind the scenes, you have a whole support network there, which I would have had none of. So people there were like, no, don't. And I'm like, okay. And when I came home from the march, there was the people who actually organized the civil disobedience, a lot of them were based out of Boston. And that group had a meeting to let's maybe do this all the time. So I went to that immediately, and we ended up forming a group that we called Mass Act Out. It was inspired by ActUp, but we wanted to do both LGBT issues and AIDS issues, where ActUp was mainly AIDS focused. And in fact, at that time, we had a really big political thing going on where Massachusetts was actually debating passing an anti-discrimination law, what we called the gay rights law, and our gay rights bill at the time. And it had actually passed the House and the Senate, and Governor Dukakis was going to sign it, but there was one guy who was the head of one of the committees, the Committee for Third Reading, who was a homophobe and a Democrat, and because, again, the Democrats were homophobes back then. He said, basically, I'm killing it. I'm keeping it in my committee, and tough. In any case, so it basically, it would take a 2/3 vote to get it pulled out of committee, and we couldn't get that many Democrats to vote for it, and no Republicans. So we basically had protests all the time. We actually ended up having a vigil every single night, like a candlelight vigil outside the State House. And then on the last day of session, when they voted to try to pull it out of committee and failed, a whole bunch of us got arrested in the Senate gallery, disrupting it. Some people got dragged out and not arrested, but 13 of us who'd actually handcuffed ourselves in got arrested. In fact, I almost had my wrist broken by overzealous cops who felt they could abuse me. It was sprained and almost broken. So we got arrested, and it was a big deal. And a couple of years later, we actually did get the gay rights bill passed with the combined lobbying and protests and all that. But we got it, which is good. But because of that, my next Pride in '88, I was actually asked to speak. So, I've been out for a year and a half, and here I am speaking at Pride in front of tens of thousands of people. Kind of crazy. And I marched with the group and gave out leaflets and raised money selling T-shirts. And this became kind of my thing for Pride. Pride for me has always been work and organizing and getting the community involved. So then in the next year, I started to become much more involved. I joined ActUp as well. ActUp split off in Boston to focus on AIDS, and I did both. And I got involved with the New York people as well. I went down a few times because New York's pretty close to Boston. But my birthday is actually the day after Stonewall Day. I was 1 and a day when Stonewall happened. So New York Pride is always that weekend, because for those who don't know, the big cities in every area like New York and Chicago and San Fran all have Pride the same weekend as Stonewall, but the splinter cities have it a week or two before or after so that people can do both, because back in the days, we always would go to Boston and then go to New York 2 weeks later. So hey, what a perfect way to celebrate your birthday with a million friends. So I would go to New York and was involved with ActUp. So, but the next year, that year of '89 was Stonewall 20. And ActUp planned a march because back then, and actually still today, the parade, the New York Pride Parade started in Midtown and then ended in the Village where the rally and everything else happened. And a lot of us felt that kind of felt weird. We're going to start in the mainstream and end in the ghetto, in the gay ghetto. So ActUp for 20 decided to, retake the spirit of rebellion of Stonewall and had a march the day before, starting in the Village and heading into Uptown. And without a permit, we were going to take the streets illegally and, whatever happens, happens. So we were planning on it almost breaking out into a riot and having arrests and whatever if we had to. So many of us got marshal trained, which you may not know. Is again, this behind the scenes stuff people don't realize with activism. That's really important that you don't get these days with all the internet activism. So we had a lot of organized people who'd been working in the women's civil rights movement and the black civil rights movement and others who trained us in how to protect the crowd, like link arms and, different things, how to say to police, no violence and look at their badge and number and all that sort of stuff. So we were all trained in that, a whole bunch of us. And then it turned out that march happened and not much actually happened in terms of the police. They kind of tried to keep us in our place, but otherwise they weren't bad. And it turned out that we found out later it was because the closeted gay mayor, Ed Koch, had warned that he didn't want any gay arrests that weekend during Stonewall 20 because he was up for election that year, and ActUp had already disrupted. He had a ceremony to mark Stonewall Place, trying to get good gay publicity, but he also did like almost nothing on AIDS. So ActUp protested that ceremony, and he was really upset that that he wasn't getting any good publicity. So the last thing he wanted was, tons of gay arrests in the papers. So we kind of got away with anything we wanted, which was kind of cool. And he was right to be worried because he ended up losing his re-election bid to Mayor Dinkins. But in any case, so later that night, the Radical Fairies, which is a group, held a quote-unquote reenactment of Stonewall event. And there were signs up everywhere. And everyone was like wondering, there was gossip going on, is it going to be a real riot? What's going to happen? And everyone was all like above. So I think a lot of people came expecting and hoping for something crazy, right? And so what really happened was they showed up dressed in like drag, and some people were dressed as cops with like fake billy clubs, and they did a whole like kind of theatrical reenactment. They even had these rubber like sponge fake bricks, and they made them yellow to commemorate Judy Garland and Yellow Brick Road, she died days before the Stonewall riots. It was this silly and fun thing. They started doing the chant that actually they said at Stonewall, "We are the Stonewall girls. We wear our hair in curls. We wear no underwear. We show our pubic hair," and stuff like that. And we're all like, it was a fun thing. But you could see in the crowd, everyone was like, okay, let's it's time, And so out of nowhere, and I believe it was an ActUp member, probably Peter Staley, who took a chant of "Take 7th Avenue," and instantly the whole crowd just jumped in, "Take 7th Avenue," and it became this big thing. And there had been these wooden barriers that were ready for the parade the next day, like horses, you know what I mean? And they were out there, so people literally just picked them up, and we went into Sheridan Square, where 7th Avenue is, and we basically took over the square, blocked traffic, and it got crazy. Because people, especially New Yorkers, are not happy if you get in their way in their car. And so we were blocking traffic, and it was queers doing it back in, the 80s, so that wasn't good. But I remember at one point I was standing on the hood of a stopped taxi in the middle of the square with one of the fake bricks in my hand, and a photographer's taking my picture, and I would kill for that picture right now, So it got really crazy at that point. And as a result, most of the ActUp people that were there, and there were a lot of us, we were marshal trained, so someone yelled, "Marshals!" And we all like instantly just jumped in, linked arms, and kind of blocked the side streets to try to protect the crowd. So that was really cool. But it got really wild. We ended up like just randomly walking around the village for a while, marching around, and we would go outside all the bars, chanting "out of the bars and into the streets," which is something we did a lot. But they never did normally. But this day, people did. Like, we'd open the door, and like people literally swarmed out and joined us, and people were like calling their friends from payphones, because that was what you had back then, going, "Hey, you got to get down here, you won't believe it." And there was this like roaming band of queers, like just roaming all around the village, taking over the streets, and the police just let us. It was really bizarre, and it got crazy with cars trying to hit people and stuff. And at one point, someone yelled, "Take West Side Highway," and we ended up going to like the highway, which is on the side of the city, and took over the intersection in the highway for like an hour and a half. We blocked the entire highway. And then there was some story that we ended up going to a police station because there had been a story that a trans woman had been found dead on the piers. And there were rumors that the police were covering it up, although it later turned out that a cop did it and killed her. So we ended up going to the police station. I know a couple of windows got broken, and they were like burning an American flag, because that was a thing back then. And eventually it made its way back to Sheridan Square. And meanwhile, like, we're still trying to protect the crowd, because that's what we did, because that's what ActUp was, protecting the community. And it got bad. Like, I got hit by 3 cars in one night. Like, who lives that, right? That was my crazy life at this point. The first one was wild. I went this car rammed into the line of marshals, and 3 of us were thrown onto the hood of the car, and then he drove down the street at like 50 miles an hour, swerving to throw us off. It was like my big James Bond moment, you know? Crazy. And then the second one, I think, just hit us. And then the third one was weird. There'd been something going on, and the cops were trying to get the cars out. So we agreed to move the marshal line like diagonal or to the intersection so they could get the cars out. And about 5 drove by, and then one of them literally swerved and rammed into the line of marshals like basically bowling. They just rammed into us, and I got thrown so high in the air that I was wearing these hot pink shorts that I was famous for back then, and someone said they saw the shorts go way over my head. So that's how high I got thrown from it. I landed on my head and had a massive bump from it, which I still have to this day. I still have a bump on my head. I call it like my war wound, you know. But I mean, I could have died in that moment. It was a little crazy, you know. And so my friends kind of made me like, okay, we need to stop. Like, you know, we need to stop putting ourselves in front of the cars for them. Meanwhile, at the same moment, there'd been this like big red Chevy that had, I guess, been trying to get through, but then the guy started yelling something about dykes and then backed into a whole crowd of lesbians and like hit them from like in reverse, which he didn't need to do, obviously. And the crowd went nuts, trashed the car. A cinder block went through the window at some point. And I later saw that the bumper of the car, someone carrying the bumper of the car through the crowd. So they trashed it. The New York Post got pictures of that and actually went back to press, changed the front page of the paper to Gays Bash Back. That was the front page of the New York Post that day because they happened to get a photographer there fast enough. The Times didn't make it. They interviewed me later and then misquoted me. But it was this crazy event. People were calling it Stonewall 2 because, you know, this went on for hours. We're like all over the streets and cars were hitting people. It was just this crazy moment in queer history that I bet you've never even heard of.
Holy shit.
Yeah, that's insane.
I mean,
Holy
how's
shit.
that for a crazy freaking like gay pride, right?
Happy Pride, yeah. Oh my God.
I got hit by 3 cars in one night. Who does that?
All I was thinking,
my life.
When you were saying the part about a band of people walking through the streets, I'm just thinking homosexuals without banners.
You know, it was really crazy. This was in '89, Stonewall 20.
Wow.
Right. I mean, this was just insane. It was so weird. What was really cool about it, though, is, you know, ActUp would always try to get people to join us. And you know, everyone's like, no, you're causing trouble, whatever. But 89 and 90 were really, like, tinder block years for the community because it was some of the worst of the AIDS crisis. People were dying left and right. People were mad. Government was doing nothing. You know, Reagan was just Reagan. And, you know, and meanwhile, because, you know, gays were forced out of the closet because of AIDS, because they were in the hospital and they had Kaposi's sarcoma on their face and, you know, you couldn't hide it. And, you know, then you had ActUp doing all this crazy stuff and other activist groups and then later Queer Nation. And so we were in the media constantly and in a way you'd never seen before. Like, you never had a gay person in the paper. And as a result, there was a wave of bashings that happened in retaliation, you know, as you always see in civil rights movements. And so everything was kind of coming together. The church was at their craziest, you know, saying basically that condoms don't work and lying and fighting against civil rights laws. And everyone was just so pissed off that as, you know, we walked down the streets, people were like, yeah, I'm in. And it became this, like, I mean, there were like thousands and thousands of people. This wasn't like, you know, 100 people roving. There were like thousands. I've never experienced anything like it in my life. It was like crazy. I mean, I got hit by 3 cars, but it was like one of the most amazing moments of my life. It was like I felt like a superhero that day, you know?
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Like, Jesus, Pride must seem very tame to you now.
Right, totally.
It's like, what did I do at Pride? Oh, I had some funnel cake.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, you know how National Coming Out Day now is? National Coming Out Day commemorates that first March on Washington I was telling you about earlier. It was the first year after that they called National Coming Out Day. Well, ActUp celebrated it by taking over the FDA, and we we literally shut down the FDA to try to get them to speed up drug approval, and it worked. They actually listened to us. But I managed to get on NBC, CBS, CNN, ABC, all the networks on their national broadcast that day at the demonstration, like trying to get arrested and stuff. I was climbing on top of one building and all sorts of crazy stuff. And I managed to get on like every single network news. And then the next year they're like, take your next step. I'm like, what the fuck more can I do at this point? Like, do I have to light myself on fire? I was just on all the networks.
Do you have like VHS footage of these? Like, do you have a?
I used to have a lot of it. I have some of it. Like, I mean, I was on a talk show. I did a lot of stuff. Yeah. You know, I was the one who like jumped out in front of the camera if they needed someone, not because I was a media whore, maybe a little, but mainly because people were afraid to talk on camera. Even activists who came out would be like, "Well, I don't want to be on camera. You know, I don't want my mom seeing it."
I wish I could see those interviews. Honestly, like
I know, right?
I know that's crazy.
There's a lot of pictures. Look on my Facebook feed. I have some pictures of like me getting arrested at different things. I still kept some of it. I used to keep all of it, and then it just became like, so much. Before I had like a scanner to digitize everything. I wish I hadn't. I threw out a bunch of it about 5 years ago, and I so regret it now. But it's what it is. I still have some of the stuff though. So there are like random pictures of me being arrested. I'm actually briefly in How to Survive a Plague, and
are you serious?
And in what do you call it? The ActUp. Oh shit! United in Anger. I have a few parts in that. You can actually see me like doing stuff like dressed as a doctor, trying to ignore women in that protest. So yeah, there is some footage out there. See United in Anger. I'm in that for a few scenes.
Damn it, man! You're like, that's amazing, man. Like, like you are the gay elder. I know that sounds like patronizing, but no, it's true. It's like you have like, obviously, like you have 20 years on me and James, and so it's like the things that you have seen are way more than we have, and that's just
right.
Like, yeah.
Kind of someone had to do it. Someone had to do it, and people just did. I mean, especially you got to remember, this is a time when our community was just dropping dead. I mean, people don't realize how bad it was. I mean, half of the gay men in New York had HIV. Half. Just imagine, I mean, if you, and it ended up being more in the end, just imagine when like you'd go to a club and someone wouldn't be there and you'd be like, you just didn't know if they were alive or dead. People would just disappear, It was just a crazy time. And, we fought so hard so that your generation would have it better, both on the gay front and not dropping dead, and all power, by the way, to the lesbians who came out for the AIDS crisis, both in care and in activism. I mean, most of what we learned about the media and about, protest and all that, we learned from the women who'd been fighting in all the civil rights movements before us. So more power to them.
Have any of y'all read Cleve Jones's autobiography, When We Rise?
I haven't read it, but I did watch the miniseries.
It's really good. It's actually one of my favorite books, but like there's a passage where he talks about like surviving the AIDS crisis. He had HIV, but like he just says that at the end, I forget what year it was, but like at a certain point he just threw out his address book because everybody in it was dead. Yeah. It was just like that image just haunted me when I was reading. But like I said, like it's like we are not a community that is very good at generationally can pass down information, and it's just like maddening that like we have not really reconciled or come to terms with the number of queer people who died in mass in a plague.
And only 25 years ago, and not to mention the ones that are still dying today because they don't have access to health care.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the infection rate among African-American gay men is 1 in 2 in the United States, which has everything, to do with both institutional homophobia, but also institutional racism.
And lack of health care.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that's
which is informed by racism in this country.
Exactly. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's all intertwined. And that was something like, it was tough being an activist then too, because AIDS pretty much touched on everything. I mean, the whole reason Reagan and the government did nothing is because it was queers and black people and junkies and, and prostitutes and all the people they didn't like who were dying. So who cares? Meanwhile, there was a Tylenol scare where like 6 people died and they jumped and put the entire resource of the federal government because it was, white people dying. It's awful to say, but it's true. That's one of the reasons it took so long to get stuff done, and that's why we were so necessary. Now, luckily, there were some good people in the government and in the medical industry and all that who wanted to do the right thing, and they needed some prodding, and we gave them that. And as a result, we joined the table and made policy and made things change, and saved millions of lives, but lost millions too. I mean, it's like sitting in a room, like I would, especially in ActUp New York meeting where literally people around you could be dead tomorrow. And, we're debating like little nuances of like, well, would it be okay to say this or what? And someone would stand up and say, I don't care. I'm dying. I need this drug tomorrow. Let's get it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was like reading How to Survive a Plague. I haven't seen the documentary, but the book is like a must read, required reading.
Yep.
And
that was my life.
Yeah, like it is crazy reading that, like the fact that AZT was on the market and the drug, the drug company, like they were testing AZT over and over and over in different drug trials, and it's like this is not good enough for people who are.
It was poison. It was poison. They'd actually rejected it as a drug for cancer.
Yeah, it's like
it was too toxic.
There were all these other drugs that nobody knew if they were good or not. And it was just like, you need to test these. You need to test them very fast, and you need to get them out because it doesn't matter to people who are going to be dead in 3 months. You need to give them anything that is going to give them hope.
Right. And not only that was my friends, I mean, I would actually like at some point, I was thinking for World AIDS Day, I wouldn't mind doing a whole VOC on How to Survive a Plague. But I mean, that was my life. I was in Boston, but I would go to New York 3-4 times a year, always at Pride. And these were all my friends. I mean, when I saw that movie, I actually had a breakdown because most of us involved have a lot of post-traumatic stress because at 18 years old, you don't expect half the people in your life to be dead, dropping dead around you, Right. Meanwhile, getting beaten by cops and, hit by cars. And I mean, it was just a crazy fucking life.
That's December 1st, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I would love to do that because honestly, you are a fountain of incredible stories. So yeah,
I agree.
And I think
it really was a crazy life,
Yeah, and it's also important, history. The CDC is in Atlanta, and they have a museum that has really.
I was arrested there.
Really?
Yep, I've been arrested there, and in the State House 2 days in a row.
It's going to be like the 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon, but the 7 degrees of locations where David's been arrested.
I know, right?
Yeah, it's they have a museum that's open on very bizarre hours, but I've always wanted to go there just to see if they actually acknowledge the fact that the CDC was prohibited by the Reagan administration to address the AIDS crisis for many years in the beginning. And I was like, have they erased that history? Have they been held accountable for their complicitness? But I've never been able to go there because they're only open on Sunday mornings or something weird.
Right. Well, the biggest thing too that the CDC was a part of was changing the definition of AIDS because the original definition was basically based on gay men and would only count opportunistic infections that men got. So if a man had candidiasis and HIV, he'd have AIDS. But if a woman got candidiasis vaginally, that wasn't considered AIDS. So that guy would get Medicaid, Medicare, housing, etc., and the woman wouldn't. And in fact, that's why we went to the CDC, was to get them to change the definition and give more people benefits. And I was part of a women's affinity group that got arrested there and all sorts of stuff. And it took years. This was something we fought for years, but they did it eventually. So,
well, even I work in the medical field. Even to today, the definition, the U.S.'s definition of AIDS is ridiculous. It's based off of a blood test. So basically, if your CD4 count is below 200, they consider you to have AIDS. But I mean, nowadays with the drugs, you can get below 200 at diagnosis, start drugs, and then get your CD4s up to 500. That doesn't matter because you still are labeled as having a stage 4 HIV infection, which is AIDS. So it's just frustrating.
That was something we actually fought for. That was part of one of our demands, because back then, when you were that low, you were going to die.
Right.
So you needed Medicare, you needed health care,
Right. Well, that's the thing is nowadays, I think it should change. Because now I feel like the way that healthcare is labeling as someone as having a stage 4 infection or as having AIDS is different than it was, 20 years ago. The drugs can reverse, the effects on your CD4 levels. And now this person is labeled forever as having AIDS instead of being HIV positive, just based off of their medical record and their chart and things. It's just something that, working as a medical professional, it's something that will stick with them forever, even though they can get their CD4s up to the level of someone who doesn't have HIV.
Yeah, getting the government to change things is very difficult.
Yeah.
The fact that gay men still can't give blood in this country.
Right. Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Test the blood anyways, so what does it matter?
Yeah, it's so antiquated, and it's just that it's never been taken off the books.
Yeah. Every now and then you hear a little movement in the community to fight for it, and then we all realize there's probably bigger fights to have, but
right.
Unfortunately.
Right. I mean, the push to get the that rule put in place as far as the CD4 levels, there was obviously a lot more of a need to have that in place 20 years ago, and people were galvanized, and now it's almost is it worth the fight?
Right. Well, I mean, on some level, there aren't a lot of negatives to it, whereas there's a lot of positives, because once you have that, you qualify for Medicare, Medicaid, etc.
Yeah, and disability.
So that was why it was such a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just a matter of it's a word on my diagnosis. It's a matter of I don't get access to health care. So we're probably getting into
American healthcare stuff.
Right, exactly.
Right. We could have hours.
That's an hour-long conversation itself.
Many hours. Yeah.
Well, I think it was great that you were able to share those stories. That's why I definitely wanted you to be included on this, on this recording, just because those stories I've heard, but they've never been recorded, I don't think. So to get them out there and have other people hear your story, I think is, it needs to be done. It was amazing to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because for me, Pride has always been work, at least for the early part of, my life, in that, I would always go. I mean, what Pride should be is a celebration of our community, but also an organizing tool. I feel like, the most important thing of Pride is all those people gathering names on clipboards and, selling merchandise and raising money for the community and getting new people involved. I mean, every year after Pride, we would get a dozen new members of whichever group, in whichever city, and in New York a lot more, because people saw us and got involved. We gave out leaflets as we marched down the street. We would usually plan a demonstration for the week after, because we just gave out tens of thousands of cards for it. I mean, marching with New York with ActUp was just amazing, because everyone wanted to be with ActUp, because first of all, it was all the hot, young, sexy people, which is always nice, And not only that, but we were right, and we were powerful, and we were angry, and it was just the feeling of 5,000, 10,000 of us marching down the street with the community cheering for us, and angry and fighting was just amazing. We would always stop in front of St. Patrick's Church, which for those of you who watch Pose, that was where ActUp disrupted the service in the first episode. That was Cardinal O'Connor's home, and we would always stop in front of the church and do a die-in in the street. And the visual of 5,000 people laying dead on the street was really powerful. And then we would stand up and face the church and point and yell, "Shame, shame, shame." And that was always one of the great moments of Pride.
Maybe we could transition to talking a little about commercial, or the problems and the pros of Pride today, because
absolutely,
obviously, or I guess sorry, I'm hijacking this from you, James.
Okay.
No, I think we all wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, I guess we could say what our first Pride was, and then maybe from there talk about how the things that we like about it and the things that we think are problematic. And obviously, this isn't a new conversation. This is a conversation that is happens every generation. But does it
Worldwide every year.
say what?
Worldwide every year they're having this discussion.
Yeah, of what's good and what's wrong with Pride? What can we do better? And it turns out, like, the more you read into history, it's like these are the same conversations that have been going around as long as Pride has been around.
I mean, that was the whole point of that Stonewall 20 thing I told you about. You know, it's
Right,
like
yeah.
this was 30 years ago. We were having this discussion.
Yeah. Yeah, so definitely for the as far as corporations using Pride to, I think, gain sales, I it has its pros and its cons, but I think it is a good thing. I think it's crazy that you can walk into Macy's and have an entire Pride section where everything is rainbow, and there's cartoons of muscle guys on tank tops
Yep.
holding rainbow flags. Like, I know it may seem a little ridiculous, but it's important to have the visibility out there. I feel like the heterosexual community walking through their store that they find, that they may shop at twice a year, 3 times a year, and then seeing a Pride section almost makes it more acceptable, I think, and palatable for the heterosexual community. I think it's a good thing.
The heterosexual community, straight people don't have communities.
Yeah, exactly.
Except they get together when they want to complain about not having a parade.
Right. Which, yes, we're going to
think...
talk about straight Pride. We're going to...
Right. Yeah, which is happening in Boston. Ew. Well, the thing for me is it's funny because it's like this is what we fought for. Visibility is so key to everything because, everything – when I was young, there wasn't this idea that this person – next door could actually be gay. Like, it just wasn't something you would think of. Whereas now you do. That's just a change. Like, if there was a Pride sign at Target, people would be like, well, why would you have that here? We don't have any of those people here. And now people would just look and go like, yeah, I'm sure people buy that here. And it's just it's not even like something you'd question. And, like it or not, that's what we fought for. We wanted, 30 years ago, if a bank came out for Pride and marched with their 10 employees and that they paid to march for them, we would cheer them like crazy, like, good for you. Oh my God, you like us. Yay. And it's amazing how different that is now. You got to be careful what you ask for sometimes, right? Because now the entire freaking Pride Parade is businesses promoting themselves while, meanwhile they might give money to anti-gay organizations or whatever. And, there's no room for the community because I think what Pride really needs to be is a celebration of us and also, an organizing tool. It's really important to get people involved because there's still a lot of work we have to fight for. Healthcare, AIDS, getting an equal rights law passed, trans issues, all this stuff is so important. And it sort of gets smothered by Microsoft and Bank of America, So, yeah. I think we need to figure out a way because it's getting crazy. This year's Boston Pride had 80 new marching groups. And it went from being a 2-hour parade to a 5-hour parade. And no one's going to sit for that because that's not even fun.
Right.
Who cares when Bank of America walks by? Maybe hopefully they give you something nice. You get a fan or a whistle or whatever. But at some point it just gets okay, enough with the fucking banks.
It's definitely a double-edged sword in that there's nothing more normalized in a capitalist culture than, being absorbed by corporations. But it's also part of me is none of these corporations were putting rainbow shit out there when it actually mattered,
Exactly.
When there was actually a fight to be had and it was actually going to lose you business to support the community. And also a lot of times it's okay, you're putting rainbow merch out here. Are you actually doing due diligence for your employees? Do you have anti-discrimination policies? Do you have gender pronoun training? And if you have sweatshops overseas, I'm sure that the queer people working in your sweatshops are not benefiting from sewing rainbows onto t-shirts. It's the thing of there's nothing warm or fuzzy about a corporation thriving off your dollars, but at the same time it's there is an element of the more that this is normal and visible, is that something that we can really take for granted? And I don't think that so is weird. Because 5 or 10 years ago, it's there wouldn't have been any of this. And
it's tough.
Yeah, it's really tough.
It's good and it's bad. It's good and it's bad. I think somehow we need to find a balance though, because Pride can't get any bigger at this point. It just, there isn't room. I mean, I'm trying to imagine what New York's going to be like this year, because not only is it Stonewall 50, but it's also World Pride. So people are coming from Europe and Asia and Africa and South America and Australia and coming to march. And I mean, I didn't go to Pride New York for a long time, but I went a couple of years ago because it was kind of an ActUp reunion. And we were spoiled in the old days because they used to let the age groups march early because people were sick. So we would get at the beginning. We didn't even start until like 4 hours into the parade. And then we marched for like hours. So, I mean, the sun was already down by the time we came in. You know, and that was like 5 years ago. Imagine now, and now add the rest of the freaking world coming to World Pride. I mean, I don't even know how they're going to do it. Is it going to be like 14 hours? Is it going to go till like 5 in the morning? Like, I don't know how they're going to do it. It's going to be like, there's got to be some sort of balance. And the other thing I worry about, like watching Boston Pride, like there were all these community groups that didn't come out until like 3.5 hours later when, you know, 2/3 of the people have left because, you know, at some point the parade just gets boring. Like that's the worst part about Pride is that it used to be wild and crazy and, you know, drag queens and floats and all sorts of fun stuff. And now it's like just boring. Right. So I feel like we need to find a balance where we like maybe put the community groups first and then like let the businesses like draw lots for where they show up. Like throw a few at the beginning because they'll have the big expensive floats, right? But like have slots and let them draw names or, you know, do a computer program to put them randomly in there. Because I think like, you know, that trans group fighting for equal rights and trying to get a bill passed shouldn't be 4 hours in. They should be up front and center, you know?
That was, yeah. I've only actually been to Pride once because last year was my first Pride.
I've been like 50.
I know. Well, you know, I just came out, so it's part of the process. So, like Atlanta Pride, I had fun. You know, like I said, they had a big section of the AIDS quilt there, and I, you know, perused that, and that was actually really moving, and had some funnel cake and listened to some music and drank some beer. I mean, it was a good time. I didn't stay the whole day because it was.
How many topless women?
A lot. They were all full of motorcycles.
Boston didn't have it. They're just wearing pasties now. It's like, come on. It's not Pride without topless women.
Free the nipple.
Yeah. It was also, I guess, like, there's that feeling of, like, you know, there's, like, there was a trans march, and obviously there's a lot of, like, trans flags flying there, and it's like, you know, but guys, there's a trans military ban in effect. Like, we're still fighting bathroom laws. Like, there's no anti-discrimination policy for gender identity, sexual orientation in the state. And it's like, you want there to be some sort of civil action, and it just people, and especially like in Atlanta, like I volunteer at an LGBT homeless center, and like most of the kids there are Black and trans, and it's like homelessness for like queer kids, especially trans like kids, especially trans kids of color, is just like huge numbers. And it's like we're not pulling, like that's always been a problem. Like when I was in college, Kate Bornstein came to like speak at my school, and like that was her complaint at the time, is that she was always frustrated with queer activists who were pushing marriage equality so hard, when it's like one of our biggest problems is that like homeless trans youth are like are being thrown away by their parents, and it seems like the community never can rouse itself to care to like gather resources for that. And so like I said, I had funnel cake. I had fun.
It's like we need celebration. We deserve it. We've all, even today, fought like through hard shit, and we came out, and we deserve a celebration. But Pride is also a protest, and we have to remember that. It's not, Pride happened because we're still not equal, you know? And we need to remember that. And I think that's where I say, like, the organizing needs to be a crucial part of it.
Yeah.
It's also I don't have a feeling of safety around progress. I guess is that when I look at all this, I'm like, all of this could very easily go away.
Right.
You know, all these corporations that are slapping rainbow shit on their products will pull out if business starts to sour on that.
Absolutely. And not only that, but marriage equality is not set in stone. I mean, the underpinnings legally for marriage equality is Roe v. Wade, and the right is trying to get rid of that. So, I mean, we already have just this week, Clarence Thomas was saying we need to revisit the marriage decision. You know, they're looking to overturn this, and as they're packing the courts, they may pull it off.
Yeah,
This fight is not over.
Right.
it's very frustrating because like we're a very stratified community. Like we're unique in that we pull from all races, all genders, all
Right.
classes of life, and it can be very hard sometimes for people who have more privilege to pull the weight for people who are fighting twice as hard. Where it's like queer women, it can be very frustrating. Where it's like when Georgia passed our horrifying heartbeat bill, it was like, and you have all these queer women online, like, we need to do something about it, and it's like, where are the queer men who are coming to support their sisters, and the truth is they're nowhere to be found. And
some of us.
Yeah, I know. I'm not you, David. Not you, James. But also the fact that,
But it's true.
we live in a horrible racist police state that's, deporting migrants, and it's like a lot of those people are queer too, and it seems like white queer people just can never be bothered or just so endemically racist that I'm getting tongue-tied because I'm frustrated.
Right. And all these issues are so interrelated. There's all that intersectionality of it, but it's all true. I mean, I've always said that LGBT rights and women's rights are completely interlinked. They're the same thing. I mean, people hate gay men because they're womanly. They hate lesbians because they're not womanly, or so they think. And that it's all part of the same thing. It's that all control over your body and all that. I mean, that was something that ActUp really pushed a lot of. We talked about that a lot. The Stop the Church demo involved also a women's group called WHAM, who it was not just about AIDS, it was about abortion rights and women's healthcare rights as well. And when I brought a similar demonstration here against our cardinal law, I made sure to get women's groups involved. I don't know if you've ever seen the book, Our Bodies, Ourselves.
No.
One of the great women's healthcare books, and the collective that organized that helped join us in organizing our demonstration against Catholic Church, because I really wanted to make the point of women's rights, LGBT rights, AIDS rights. These are all the same issue. It's about control over our body. Don't make us feel guilty about sex. Let us be who we want to be. It's all the same thing, and so many, particularly white gay men, don't get that.
Yeah, it's like there would be no homophobia towards men without institutional misogyny. It just would not exist.
Right, totally. Or very little, at least.
Yeah.
The underpinning of it.
Did anybody see Billy Porter? He's on the show Pose, but he was on, I think it was Stephen Colbert one day, and he was talking about how how he likes to dress, and the fact that he's now considered a fashion icon ever since he wore that dress to the Oscars. But he made a good statement about how when a woman wears pants, she's considered strong and masculine, and if a man wears a dress or women's clothes, it's considered disgusting, or people look at it in a certain way, which basically states male clothes or being masculine is strong, and women are looked down upon and disgusting. And so basically he's like, I'm going to wear a dress, and I'm not conforming to that, heteronormative idea of how to dress. And I just think that needs to be bigger in the gay community. I still think that there is this whole mask for mask.
Right.
I just think it's icky, and it just needs to go away. I don't understand how gay men could still be so resistant when it comes to accepting new genders or effeminity.
Yeah, or just femininity. It's that weird thing where it's definitely internalized homophobia or
exactly.
And it's also just
sexism.
Yeah, it's when you boil it down, it's just that gay men are still men, and they grow up learning sexism. And it's also, I feel like some gay men delude themselves into thinking that hating women is somehow subversive, as in that somehow gay men treating women badly is bucking heteronormativity, when really it's just misogyny. But that's like a 200 level course, and I think most gay men are working on a 101 level of
We're still in the prereqs.
Right.
Well, that was one of the nice things about being an activist, is that we were sitting there next to strong women with a history of fighting, and we learned so much from them. And they also called us on our shit, when we would do stuff that was, or say things that weren't good, they would say see, this is what we're talking about, and they were right. So
Yeah,
You know,
obviously we can all do better. Cis people can do much better by trans people. White queer people can do like miles better by queer people of color.
right.
Have any of y'all read Whipping Girl by Julie Serrano?
I have not.
That is again another required reading book. Now that is like a she was writing like I guess the one caveat is like she wrote it in like early 2000s, and so a lot of terminology that she's using is we would consider outdated, but that is like a transgender Bible about the scapegoating of femininity and how like essentially like we're very comfortable as a society pretending that men and women are equal, but like we're very uncomfortable with the idea that femininity is it's equal to masculinity. And she says a lot about like she talks a lot about trans misogyny and trans transphobia within the queer community. It's worth reading.
I mean,
can you tell me the name of the book again and the author?
It's called Whipping Girl, a transsexual woman on sexism and the scapegoating of femininity, and the author is Julia Serrano.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, historically, there's always been a ton of sexism in the gay community. I mean, when I was younger, I mean, now you're starting to see a lot more bars that are mixed men and women, and partially because you're also seeing a lot more bars that, are mixed gay, straight, whatever, But back in the days, there were men's bars and there were women's bars, and you didn't cross that, If you walked into a woman's bar, they'd be like, you have to put on a tie because they couldn't legally keep you out. And if you walked into a gay bar, a woman walked into a gay bar, oh, everyone would be like, oh, fish. Oh, there's fish. Blah, blah.
Oh, my God, I've heard that before.
Gross. It was so disgusting.
Yeah.
Funny story. There was a gay bar in Boston that was always mixed called the 1270. But there was also a lesbian bar in town. And for some reason that shut down. And then suddenly this gay bar that had been mixed, but mixed always meant 80-20 men, women. All of a sudden it started becoming parity because the women had nowhere else to go. And all the men who were kind of okay when there were a few dykes in the room got really upset and stopped going. And it became this big thing where the men were going, it's been overrun by lesbians because it's now 30%. God, it was just so crazy. They ended up reopening under a new name, Maximum Security, trying to be overly aggressively masculine to try to push the women away. And say to the men, no, we are a men's bar. It was just this gross moment in Boston history that's embarrassingly icky.
I have a question. So in Atlanta, there's only one dyke bar that I know about that's still in operation.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a bunch of men's gay bars, but in general, it's bars have started to, especially women's bars have started to go away or just gone completely. There are no dyke bars left in San Francisco, which is the saddest sentence that I've ever had to say aloud.
Right.
I was wondering, where y'all live, are there still scenes to go to? Because around here, it's pretty slim pickings.
Well, in Chicago, there's a small community called Boys Town, where of course that's misogynistic, but it's more of a gay neighborhood. Yeah, if you've ever been to Chicago, there's basically a strip of Halsted Street that is basically all gay. The posts are rainbow. They actually just changed the crosswalks to being rainbow crosswalks. But I do know, I would say 99 probably percent of the bars there cater a lot to gay men. But of course there's, I don't know, I just feel with having an entire neighborhood, there's a lot of straight people in the bars. There's a lot of straight women. There's a lot of gay women. Right. So it's all pretty mixed.
There was the only thing I know about Boys Town is that it was I only I know this secondhand is that it has a reputation for being fairly racist, to the point that the reason that we now have the I mean it's a good thing that we do the black and brown LGBT pride flag, which is basically just the rainbow flag with the black and the brown stripes on top of it. That was made in response by a woman who works for the Chicago LGBT center, cause she felt they needed people of color needed to have their own flag, and I think it was largely in response to racism that was perpetrated by white gays and Boys Town.
No, I definitely I can see that. There's different bars in Chicago, I think, that cater. If you go to, I honestly I don't go there, but there's a bar called Hydrate that typically I mean,
Hmm.
if you go there, that is just the ripped white tan guy,
Yeah.
and if you go there and you're not that, you feel almost out of place.
Hmm.
My husband's Mexican. A lot of the people that we hang out with are, of different races, and backgrounds. So we go to, there's a bar called Roscoe's, which, caters a lot to the, RuPaul's Drag Race queens. They have shows there all the time. So I think just being that they pull in this massive thing in pop culture into this one bar, that if you go to Roscoe's, there's a huge mix of, races and genders and, a lot of different people. But we also go to a place called Scarlet, which, is a lot of, Latin music and things. So
Hmm.
I guess I could still see that it's somewhat divided. But I don't know. I think it's getting a little bit better. But I still wouldn't go to Hydrate.
Well, I mean, as someone who travels around the world, or at least has in the past, with my weird roller coaster hobby, I try to check out the communities when I travel a little, because especially when I'm in Boston, I go to straight clubs more than I go to gay clubs. But when I'm overseas, I tend to go to gay ones because I feel safer, because I don't know if I'm safe in, various cities, in a bar. If I get a little drunk and flirt with someone, might I get killed and the police help.
Right.
So I look at, and it's interesting when you look at you pull up on the internet, the gay map of, Madrid or whatever, and half the places are closed. I mean, and that's becoming a thing all around the world. It's one of those weird, it's weird because in some areas, and the same thing's happening with, the gay ghettos, the lesbian and gay neighborhoods are disappearing. It's interesting because in the, what we call the third world and whatever, in the other parts of the world where LGBT rights are just becoming a thing, you're starting to see more gay bars and lesbian bars, and you're seeing more neighborhoods, gayborhoods as they call them, you're starting to see more. But in the rest, in the West, it's the opposite. It's falling apart. I mean, in Boston, it used to be the South End was the gay neighborhood. And, the South End's gotten so expensive, we can't afford to live here anymore. So now it's really, and I think with marriage equality and everything, we're moving into the suburbs. Everyone used to move into the big cities, and now we're moving out, which is good. But, progress comes with a cost, and that's of, the sense of community.
Yeah, that's to draw a correlation. Obviously, race, is not the same thing as sexual orientation and gender identity, but desegregation was great for black people, but it was bad for black business. It's kind of the same thing. It's the internet has changed how we date and move and get together, but also marriage equality is sort of, it's great for queer people. It's not great for places where queer people used to, and obviously it's not just marriage equality, the decriminalization of same gender sex, with Lawrence v. Texas. It's a lot of things that have just
acceptance.
Yeah, acceptance has basically killed a lot of the gay bars. Sorry, real quick, to amend something that I said earlier, I misspoke. It's not actually Boys Town in Chicago. I was conflating two things. The flag, the black and brown, people of color pride flag, it was designed by Amber Hicks, who is the executive director of the Office of LGBT Affairs for the city of Philadelphia. I only thought it was Chicago because I listened to her on Query, which is the podcast that Cameron Esposito hosts, and they talk about Boys Town in that episode, so that's why I was mushing them together in my head.
But also what you said isn't wrong.
Right.
About Chicago either,
Right.
Also, Cameron Esposito is a pretty rad person, and if anyone needs a queer podcast to listen to, Query is actually really good.
Well, so just back to what I was saying is I think that it's interesting that, progress has changed things, because on some level, when I was, 20, or 21, I guess I should say, because we're talking about bars, the thought of I'm going to go out for drinks after work with, the straight people at work, that's just not what you did. I would go to a gay bar, and that was the only place I went and felt safe, because, if I look at someone in a straight bar, I might get beaten up. And my straight friends didn't want to hear about who I dated last night or whatever. And it was just, that was the world then, this idea of, my women friends come out with me to the bar. We didn't do that that. There was, okay, after work, I'd be like, okay, bye everyone. And we went our separate ways, and now, I go wherever, I just went out. I just went out 2 nights ago to a straight club with friends, almost all of whom were, almost everyone there was straight except for the one cute boy I picked up. But this is Vok after all.
Yeah.
But and. But the truth is, that's progress. We don't need a gay bar so much. I can go wherever. It used to be, that if you were gay on Thursday, you went to this bar, and if you were Friday, you went to this bar, and on Saturday, you went to this bar, and on Sunday, you did this, and on Tuesday, you went to this bar, because we went out like 6 nights a week back then, and that was our scene, and that was our lives, and our lives revolved around bars, and that's not all that healthy, So
Sure.
now we've come to a better place where I can go out for drinks after work with friends, and I go out to a club, to a straight club, and whatever. But that kills community because the very last full-time gay dance club in Boston is closing like this month. And there's literally not a one. You have we're buying out the straight club for a night with gay promoters, and the same thing with lesbians. And there's a couple of like lounges and stuff, and there's like bars, but there's very little left. And Boston's one of the like gayest and biggest cities in the country, and we've got like nothing. There's like no scene left.
Yeah.
And it's sad. On some level, it's progress. It's great. I'm glad that you feel you can go out with whoever tonight. That's what we fought for. But there's a sense of loss. We're losing community. And that's where these kind of stories we're telling in this podcast are important, because we don't have that sense of community anymore.
It definitely makes me feel both glad and envious, because like describing being able to go to a bar and be just surrounded by community, like I feel like even though it's very easy to go online and meet other queer people online, I think getting out and actually finding like groups of queer people is, for me at least, like still extremely difficult. And it like there's part of me that I think feels like a pang of loneliness and longing, that like, God, that just sounds very
Absolutely.
like it was special, but it was specialness that was born out of necessity and fear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's weird, and certainly internet dating's changed everything, especially, for gay men, internet hookups. I mean, who needs to go to the bar? You can just call up what you want right there, like it's like ordering a pizza now,
Yeah.
Who needs to go to a bar and actually, like, I don't know, interact with people and talk to them,
Right, yeah, you've already you've typed up exactly what fantasy you're looking for that night, and suddenly someone knocks at the door and fulfills it for you. So.
Right. And you don't have to waste time with that silly small talk. Like, I don't have to know your name. I don't give a shit.
Right.
Which is sad in its own way, but fun. But again, I'm glad it's there for those who want it. I'm glad, but there's progress and there's loss, and they always come hand in hand, unfortunately.
Yeah. See, I think I guess hearing your guys' stories about the cities that you're from, I guess I don't know if Chicago's slightly different in the sense that I don't know of very many gay bars that are closing down. I feel like they're actually thriving right now. I think after there's definitely this group of RuPaul's Drag Race is huge right now, and there's over 100 something queens that have been on that show, and I just feel like they are always on tour going to different gay bars, that no matter what day of the week you can go and look for events that are happening on a Tuesday night in Chicago, and you will find a drag show that is pulling in a couple hundred people just to get into the door of this place.
But remember, Chicago's one of the biggest cities in the country. That's
right.
The one benefit. You could say that in New York. You could probably say that about New York, Chicago, San Francisco, and LA, and that's it. There's nothing big to do on a Tuesday in Boston, and maybe even Atlanta. I would bet there may not be. There may be something, but that's it. There'll be like that one thing to do.
Yeah, Atlanta has like maybe like one drag event a week, and then other words, it's just like, we're a sprawled out city. We're not very concentrated. There's like a lot of burbs and like sprawling suburbs, but we're not a concentrated like city like New York or Chicago.
Right.
Yeah.
And worldwide, I've seen that. Like, because when I travel, like I might be in, Vienna on a Wednesday. That actually, when we were mentioning that, was it Vienna or Munich? Me and a friend, because I always bring like my gay maps with me. We were out on like a Tuesday or a Wednesday after our roller coastering, and I had my map. My friend's like, "Hey, let's go find a bar," and we started like walking around, looking at my map, going from place to place, and literally like places were either closed for good or closed because it's Tuesday and we're not going to do any business, or we'd walk in and there'd be like 4 people there. That's what's happening now. The community comes out on weekends to party. If you're in the really, really big cities, there's a party every night, but not much elsewhere.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, how many people live in Chicago? So I would hope you'd be able to have a place on a Tuesday where there's, 100 people, but you're not going to find that in Dubuque.
Right. Yeah.
But you still will on a Friday or a Saturday, but
yeah. I also wanted to talk to you guys quickly before we wrap up. I wanted to talk about, there is this issue of Pride becoming I wouldn't say it's an issue, actually, let me rephrase that. There's a topic of Pride becoming a lot more of a family event, and I know a lot of people and allies will go and bring kids, and it's certainly not the same type of event as it was before. And so we were talking before about even the topless women putting on pasties now. There's a lot of censorship when it comes to Pride, I think, and I almost think it may be a good thing trying to make it a little bit more of a family event. I just don't know if it's not necessarily the place nowadays where you would want to see some guy walking down the street in a jockstrap, which I'd say 5, 6, 10 years ago, that was definitely the norm, or you would see people, walking around with collars on and different chains and sporting their kink. But I just feel like
do.
They still, exactly. They still do. Do you think it's time for us to make Pride more commercial and make it more family friendly and get rid of these kinks at Pride? Or
No.
No. I mean, first of all, I don't think that's family unfriendly. I mean,
Right.
I don't think there's anything wrong with kids being exposed. I mean, obviously not like sex, but I don't think there's anything wrong with kids being exposed to different ideas that maybe, aren't what we expect them to be exposed to, but I think that's fine. I mean, I don't think any kid's been damaged by seeing topless women walking by.
Right. But I also think there's a
parents
difference
freak out, that's their problem.
Yeah, there's a difference between topless women and a flogging in the street. Like that.
I don't think that's necessarily bad either. I think the way that you present information to children based on their age, if like a small child, like I said, as long as like people are not like penetrating each other in the street, it's like there's a scene going on, and it's like, how do you explain that to a kid? And it's like, well, that's just something that grown-ups do for fun, or that's a grown-up thing. And usually the kids will be like, okay, and they'll internalize that and move on. And I think a lot of the discomfort around this is not necessarily that it's dangerous for kids, it's because parents don't want to have uncomfortable conversations with their children over stuff that is not that in other countries would be considered to be very PG.
Well, I mean, isn't that the very discussion of LGBT people in the first place? Like, stay in the closet. My kid shouldn't have to be exposed to that. We shouldn't have gay characters on TV because then I have to have that uncomfortable conversation with my kid. And I'm very concerned when we try to, put that on other segments of our community. I mean, I may not always enjoy or appreciate all of those people and things that are at Pride, but I think Pride is about freedom, and we don't want to marginalize our own community in the way we've been marginalized. And that's something that's a constant discussion in Pride. Like, there was a time where people were like, we shouldn't let ActUp in because they're radical and they're breaking the law. There's ones who said we shouldn't allow the dykes on bikes because it's a bad image for our community. Like, fuck that. Fuck that. This is our community, and if people have problems with it, don't come. If you don't want to have that conversation with your children, that's your problem. That's not the problem of the people in the parade. And I don't think we should be censoring anyone. I mean, no sex.
Right.
But,
yeah. Basically, what I was kind of getting at is like the sex in the street kind of things like that. Someone in a corner
but it never
giving
really
a
does.
blowjob.
Does that actually happen?
Or at least in my experience.
I mean, if it gets to that point, I think the police are already going to get involved if they see it. So, I mean, that's not an issue of something we're allowing. That's just someone getting out of control and doing something. And that can happen anywhere. I mean,
Right. Yeah, no, I just think maybe or at least I would say one of my first Prides, it wasn't my first Pride, but I think I was like a junior in high school at this time. So I was like, 16, 17. And I remember walking down the street. I was walking down Halstead, and there was a full-blown sex party happening on the second floor balcony overlooking the Pride. And you would, this guy was getting railed over the window and just like, I mean, and obviously as a 17-year-old, I was like, fuck yeah, I get it, you know. But
No,
now
James,
looking,
we need to.
looking back as a, slightly older, I'm like, oh, you know, I guess if
But
there
I
was
mean,
a
let's be honest,
12-year-old or a
that
10-year-old walking
that's
down the street, that's
but
different.
But that's not something we allow. That's something that happened that we can't control what other people do, and that's up to the police to deal with because that has nothing to do with really the parade itself, you know. And I think that's also an extreme. I mean, I've been to, like I said, I've been to like 50 pride parades if you count, like, you know, because there was a time when back in my activism, I was also involved with Queer Nation, which is about visibility. And there was a time in like the mid 90s where a bunch of us went to a lot of different smaller town pride parades in Boston to try to support them, because a lot of people would go to Boston Pride because, hey, I won't get in TV. There's 100,000 people there, but I'm not going to go to my like small town one where I'm probably going to make it on the news and people will see me. So we went out and supported that. So I've been to like 50, if you count New York, Boston, and all the others. And I mean, that's really rare, you know, and if it happens, I imagine the police would normally stop that, and not unfairly. They should, you know.
Yeah, in general, it's like, yeah, don't have sex at Pride because obviously the people around you are not consenting to like be close to your exertions. But otherwise, like in terms of kink stuff, like obviously there are degrees to this. Like someone walking around with like a puppy mask or whatever, like do what you want, that's fine. Obviously, like
tons this year.
Yeah, like obviously it can be taken, like if people are performing like full on scenes, there's always a degree of like, are the people around you okay? Are they consenting to being like watching this? But I think for the most part, at least in Atlanta Pride, it was fairly tame. Like I didn't see anything. Obviously, like we're kind of smaller than most city prides, but I didn't see anything that, you know, frightened my sensibilities or made me cry my pearls. I wish I had seen somebody getting railed. That actually sounds
Let me my 17-year-old eyes were as happy as could be. But
exactly.
Was that your first pride?
I think it was my second pride. I think my first pride was a lot more tame. I think I stayed for a little while and then got out of there. But yeah, that was my second pride. I still remember my outfit.
So should I? In the spirit of full disclosure and VOC, I will admit that there was, I don't know if you know, in New York, after the parade, they always have a pier dance, mostly for men, but, you know, some women come. And there's, you know, big name celebrities and DJs and whatever. And one year, like, you know, back when I was 19 or something, I will admit at the pier dance, I did get a blowjob in the middle of the crowd during the fireworks.
Yes. Yeah.
It wasn't intended. Like this couple came, we were like looking and making out, and one of them just dropped, and I was like, "Oh my!" And it was so good, I saw fireworks.
Yeah, literally.
But that was not at the parade, just to be clear, and there were no kids there. And I kind of stopped it pretty quickly because I was like, okay, maybe this isn't appropriate. Although everyone was looking up, so I don't think anyone even noticed.
Right. Yeah.
I'm full of stories, right?
Right. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, we love it. And then I think we could probably wrap up soon, but I did want to talk about this straight pride. I don't think we have to spend that much time on it, but we can just talk a little bit of shit before we wrap up. What are your thoughts on straight pride? Yes.
Well, you know, that's happening in Boston, unfortunately, at least the first one. There may be others. It's just dumb. I mean, first of all, it's not straight pride. It's white supremacists having a march in protest and saying, oh, what about me? What about me? Poor white straight male being left out of everything. Fuck you all. I don't care. Shut up. Not straight white men. Bigots.
It's like 8 dudes, right?
Right.
It's just 8 dudes like having a hateful barbecue.
Right. And randomly they have like one gay guy with them who's you know, a white supremacist, but otherwise, you know, and thinks that, you know, the type that thinks that gay people are bad, you know, for being so gay. But yeah, no, I mean, I think honestly, we're giving them more attention than they deserve. It's a couple of bigots being assholes, just like all over the internet. You know, you see the people complaining, oh, I'm a white man, I'm being left out of the Avengers and Captain Marvel because only 85% of them are white men. Like fuck
Right.
you, shut up.
Yeah.
I'm not, I feel like we almost shouldn't even dignify them
No,
with discussion.
it's so small that it's just laughable. I think it was more frustrating a few years ago when there was a straight pride Twitter hashtag that
Right.
got fairly big and was circulating with like straight people talking about like how they should celebrate their straightness, and it's like, okay, y'all are gonna get together and talk about like your happy history of conversion therapy, like
Right.
what are you gonna
Talk
talk
about
about?
how you have rights I don't. You've never been fired. Like, yeah, it's just ridiculous. It's white men who fear being like the minority that they treat and being treated the way they treat others. It's
Right.
like, fuck you. I'm not like. I mean, I guess we have to address it at some point in America because isn't that a lot of what the Trump movement is about? Is white men feeling left out and left behind? But you know what? Sorry, sharing isn't being left out. Letting
Right.
other people to the table is not oppression. You know?
Right.
It's like I have a term I use like white. So many like straight white men in America have oppression envy. Like they think that not being better than everyone is oppression. Fuck you.
Right. I found this quote, and I think it's been quoted a bunch of different ways, but it's basically when you get accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. And that is exactly what this straight pride march is. I had another thing that I read, and it said, gay pride was not born of a need to celebrate being gay, but our right to exist without persecution. So instead of wondering why there isn't a straight pride movement, be thankful that you don't need one. I mean, what are you, exactly what Katie said, like, what are you celebrating?
Nothing.
Exactly. There's
They're
nothing to
just
fight
being
for.
assholes.
Right.
They're not. I mean, let's not dignify the things they're saying because none of it's true. It's all a lie. They're just assholes who want to be better than everyone and are upset that they're not anymore. Like that's all they deserve. They're nothing.
Yeah,
they're
so-
incels. They're incels mad they can't get laid because they're assholes.
Yeah,
no, you're not getting laid because women are standing up for their rights. You're not getting laid because you're an asshole. Fuck
Right.
you.
It should be changed to the participation trophy march.
The incel march, because that's what they are, the involuntary celibates.
Yeah,
which are
scary.
some of the
Yeah.
most dangerous, violent people out there.
Right. I know. And now we're going to get like 100 negative downvotes on YouTube. Thank you. Sorry.
Well, that's because that's what they do. They spend all their day on YouTube.
Oh, exactly.
And
Well, come on, they're probably not listening to a Pride
Month.
podcast. But you know what? Someone will listen to it and post it, and then like it'll become the thing to like downvote us, and they'll be like, "Look, hey, we're great, powerful people. We put a nasty comment on YouTube and downvoted someone. We're important now."
if
Fuck.
that's the case, then we want all the downvotes. Send them all
Right?
our way, please.
Well, I mean, have you ever noticed anytime anything like, about women's rights or anything comes up on any of our podcasts, suddenly that one gets like, the 20 downvotes on YouTube and nothing else does.
Yeah.
It's always funny.
Some
And
angry
who
dude
cares?
Sitting at home.
Yeah.
And then I know
Anyways.
you also, I don't want to skip this. You also wanted to
Yeah,
talk
no,
about
actually,
the
like-
March.
Yeah. So for the, we were having that talk about different, pride and corporate stuff. Well, another part of the discussion too is, whether it's appropriate to have the cops there when in a lot of areas they're the ones who oppress us and all that. And, no politicians and all that. So there is a group calling themselves Reclaim Pride, which is a lot of activists in the community, and yes, some from ActUp and elsewhere, who are actually having a counter pride. They're having their own march, kind of basically very similar to what we did in the Stonewall 20 that I mentioned earlier. And they also, by the way, did one in Stonewall 25 as well, I forgot to mention, where they're going to have their own pride parade, I think at the same time, actually. I don't know all the details, but if you Google Reclaim Pride or look in social media, I'm sure you can find it. So for those, if this podcast comes out in time, those in New York who want to participate or maybe want to do both, which is probably what I would do if I wanted to get in the clusterfuck that's New York that day, they're going to be having a counter Pride to send the messages of community and inclusiveness and protest that Pride was originally meant to be.
Nice.
On the note of police at Pride, do any of y'all follow Anthony Oliveira on Twitter?
Nope.
No.
He's a comics creator, but he's also a journalist, and he's written extensively over the past couple of years about. He wrote this really great article called "Death in the Village" about there's a serial killer in the Toronto gay village who was targeting mostly Arab gay men, and
Oh,
the
yeah.
police,
Yeah.
the police knew about it for years
Mhm.
and failed to communicate with the community about it. And like Anthony Alvera, he rewrites extensively about the fact that like the police do not belong at Pride. The police should not be welcome at Pride. The police are not
Right.
our friends. The police have, do not value our lives. Like, don't be fooled about
Right.
this. So yeah, I would recommend Death in the Village. It's a fairly long article, but it's worth reading to catch up about a really horrific serial killing case over the past, I think it was like decade or so. Like, I forget how many men were targeted, but
Right.
yeah,
I,
I'm definitely in consensus with him where I'm like, don't trust the police.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm torn because, I mean, yeah, I get it, and I agree, and I mean, and as someone who has been beaten by cops, I was arrested by a cop who bashed me at an abortion clinic when we were protecting the clinic. I was stomped on at the NIH. I'm sorry, yeah, no, at the NIH, a cop stomped on me and called me a faggot. I had my wrist almost broken, I mentioned earlier. So I've had not all the best interactions with cops, so I get all that, but at the same time, I'm still really worried that someday something really bad's going to happen at a Pride somewhere, because I'm frankly amazed happily that it hasn't happened. And I think we absolutely need the police there. And for all that we say, they're bad and they certainly have to get better, they are here to protect all of us. And they're at every other parade for good reason, especially these days. So I'm going to go on the side of I'm glad they're there, and especially if they're welcoming, like here in Boston they are, and there's actually a bunch of gay cops, and lesbian cops. So
yeah, I was going to say in Chicago, I don't know if they necessarily like the gay cops or whoever volunteer for that day or whatever it is, but it seems like the cops on the parade route are wearing they usually have something rainbow on, and you can tell they're either accepting of the community or one of us. So I don't know. I think that they definitely need to be there. Things can get out of hand.
Yeah, it's thorny and it's tough. Where it's like I do not think the police have the best interest of most of the community, or especially people of color, like. Mm-hmm. Especially in Atlanta, like we do not have a good track record of the police interacting with marginalized people. At the same time, I do want, like, when I was at Pride, as much fun as I had there, I definitely had my ears up the whole time, like a rabbit, like, because you live in America, you live in a gun culture, you're with a bunch of other people who have been targeted in the past, and so you're just hyper aware of the possibility of something bad happening. And it's like this year at DC Pride, there was a guy waved a gun and like people ran, and it's like Pulse was like definitely like kind of a wake up call, that of just how easily like something even like in my mind I'm like when is the next Pulse like
which is like, I mean, ever since Pulse, just the way that we go out, or the way that I act at a club is completely different before and after. I mean, now, maybe just because I'm getting older too, but it's just like I don't get, shitty fuck wasted at bars anymore and kind of lose awareness of what's going on. Like, I don't know, it's definitely different. And any big events that I go to, I mean, even if I'm going to a concert, I feel like a lot more aware of what's going on around me, just because Pulse in and of itself just woke me the fuck up with some things,
and
the public sees us.
And I think honestly, there's a generational difference, because I came out, decades before you, and that was my life. Like every time I walk down the street to this day, always am looking around, because if you were a gay man in 1988 walking down the street, you could be dead tomorrow. You could be dead in 10 minutes. It could happen anywhere. And I also, being a radical activist, was usually wearing, a Queer Nation t-shirt or an ActUp shirt or something that said, because someone had to do it. So we did it. And particularly those of us who were activists basically painted targets on our chest. We knew that, and we were sometimes the victim of violence because of it, but we knew we were doing it because someone fucking had to. And we did. But I mean, I know there's not a moment in my life I'm not looking. My eyes aren't always all around me, because there's just no such thing as safe. You know, I'm starting to finally in 2019 relax a little bit about it, you know, but I mean, you know, I lived through that where, you know, walking out of a gay bar was one of the most dangerous things you could do in that era, you know, because people did. I mean, that's where the bashers would target, because, you know, they don't know you're gay. I mean, this is before Grindr. You could, you know, now someone, if they really want to beat someone up, could just go on Grindr and pick them up and kill them. But back then, you know, they're walking out of a gay bar, they're obviously gay, and that's what they would do it, you know?
Yeah.
There's definitely always a risk factor of congregating or just actually making yourself visible in any way. Obviously, it's very different now than it was 20, 30 years ago, but, you know, we put a rainbow flag outside of our house for the first time this year, and it was like that first night. I took it in the first night.
Yeah.
But I was like, we live in a very like Trump country neighborhood, and it was like I was expecting someone to slash my tires or someone to like spray paint the house. It didn't happen, but I'm also aware that like we got a lot of stares from like people who were walking their dogs, like looking at it like, what the hell is this?
Yeah, I mean, even me and my husband, we moved. Like I said, we're about an hour outside the city now. To a smaller suburb, and we didn't put up any Pride stuff this year. We just moved in March, and I just want to get kind of like a feel of the neighborhood and kind of introduce us to different neighbors. And it's sad that we still have to do that, but I would say at least once we do feel comfortable, we can put up a rainbow flag or something during Pride Month. It's just this year we're taking a little Pride hiatus.
I mean, you got to stay safe. You got to stay safe. I mean, the first thing we learn as a community is we have to take care of ourselves. The first thing you learn when when you're in the closet and as you come out is everything you do could have consequences, and that's awful. That's just awful, but it's true. It's just reality. You know, I am in. You know, at least I when I grew up, I knew I was in danger every moment of my life. Mm-hmm. Well, you know, maybe that's part of why I put myself in harm's way to protect the community so much, because I never thought I was going to make it. I didn't think I was going to make it to 40, and here I am at 50, you know, like, so good for me.
Yeah.
This has been great. I actually really enjoyed this.
Yeah, I think it was a good discussion. I'd like to do this yearly, you know, if we can do it every Pride season. And then definitely, David, if you want to do something for World AIDS Day, I would love to jump in on that. Absolutely.
Well, if we do, I'd like to make it more about I wouldn't mind doing around say how to survive a plague or something, only because I don't want to make it all about me. But you know, that would be something we could share and discuss together.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah. To anyone listening, go read How to Survive a Plague. It is an incredible book about it's one of the most inspiring books about activism that I've ever read.
See the movie, see the documentary. It's really good. It actually was nominated for both an Oscar and an Emmy, and it's really, really good and powerful. You know, if you live through that area, I'll just give a trigger warning. It might be a little triggering seeing, reliving that era, because it absolutely was for me. And most people I know, but it's really powerful. It can be really depressing if you're having depression issues, be warned, but it is uplifting in the end and powerful, and really you come away thinking, God, our community did something, and it's powerful. And also United in Anger, the history of ActUp. That is also very similar. They tell different stories around the story of ActUp, but they're very similar and really good.
Does anyone have any other book recommendations? Because I have a couple that I'd like. I've actually been plowing through a lot of queer stuff and queer movies this June, just in the spirit of the season.
You told mine.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. If you want to give out a reading list or something.
Yeah, I've already mentioned, so we talked a little about How to Survive Plague and Whipping Girl. If it, Alison Bechdel's comic book series, which I think she, for 25 years.
Yeah.
The Compendium has been out for a few years, The Essential Dykes to Watch Out For.
Yeah.
It is studying the rings of a tree, in terms of just a perfect slice of American history, because she wrote it week to week for over 25 years, and it's all the things that we've been talking about now are identical to the conversations that queer people were having 25 years ago. It's really it started like the early bits of the comic are fairly character driven, but it's also a lot of it is a polemic. But towards the end, it started to become just like a straight up polemic about the Bush years, when I feel like Alison Bechdel was just losing her mind because the Bush administration was just a nightmare to live through. So yeah, Dykes to Watch Out For is just always worth reading. It's an incredible comic. And also, I read this book called Queer City, Gay London from the Romans to the Present Day by Peter Ackroyd, which is just about the like thousands of years history of looking at. Obviously, it's not quite right to call people in the past like gay, transgender. Like we would refer to them as that, but obviously, like the idea of gender identity and sexual orientation as identity is fairly modern and contemporary. But but looking at like the history of people who we would call gay, bi, and trans throughout history, it's really fascinating just because it's very weird to like read about like gay men being harassed by soldiers in the 1700s, like in London, and like fighting back against soldiers, and then like going through periods of political acceptance and peace, and then like having a downturn. And it's really interesting just like to see that the way that progress is often cyclical instead of being a straight line. So yeah, Queer City, Gay London from the Romans to the Present Day is it's an interesting read, worth picking up.
On a different note, TV, Doom Patrol, has anyone seen that? Good. So good. Lots of queer content. You've got a closeted gay superhero. You've got Danny, the genderqueer sentient teleporting street. Believe it or not, yes. Something that, by the way, was done in the comics by like 20 odd years ago, but they're doing on this TV show. So if you want a really bizarre, very, very, very different take on superheroes, Doom Patrol is awesome and very queer.
I also just finished watching, I just caught up, like it's a year later, on the assassination of Gianni Versace by, I was about to say by the coward Robert Ford, but that's not right. Yeah, the assassination of Gianni Versace. It's on Netflix. I thought it's probably the best show that I've watched in a really long time. I was really floored by it, and I think I want to do a VOK about it eventually. I know Bina did a true crime episode about the serial killer Andrew Cunanan, where they talked a little about the show, but I'd like to do more of like a full exploration of it. But it's because there's stuff in it that's like weirdly relevant to my life that I wasn't expecting. Obviously, like I've never been targeted by a serial killer, but yeah, there's a lot of like queer stuff that's like really juicy that's running through the veins of that show that I would love to talk about. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but When We Rise, the autobiography by QueenJames is truly an excellent and fun little read. That's patronizing. He was an aide for Harvey Milk. He was very active in the 70s and 80s in San Francisco. And he's also most notable for being like the AIDS memorial quilt was his brainchild. That was a product which, having seen that at Pride last year, I was like really deeply moved by it. And it's always it's an important part of our history and shouldn't be forgotten.
Nice. Yeah. And then, of course, with gay people in the media, I would like to talk about, and I've been pimping this podcast for a long time, but I want to record an episode on Pose. If you haven't seen it, I recommend catching it. They just put it on Netflix, and I think it did. I know Bina's talked about it, so it did get to the UK by now. I think they're 2 episodes into season 2, and it is a fantastic show. They actually have trans actors playing trans parts and gay actors playing gay parts. So it's fantastic. The first season was really good, but the second season I feel like is a little bit more dramatic. I'd say maybe the first season was a little bit like Diet Pose.
More fun.
Yeah.
Well, because now the AIDS crisis has hit. So,
yeah. And I mean,
it's hard to be fun. Totally fun.
It's very, there's a couple parts of different episodes that are very, very heavy. But it's really good. And then, of course, on a lighter note, if you haven't watched RuPaul's Drag Race at this point, I recommend just watching it. Any season, just pick up a season and watch it. It is funny and I don't know. It's a good way to escape. There's not very much serious things going on that show. It's a show about drag queens walking the runway, so it's great.
And if you like either of those things, Paris is Burning is on Netflix.
Oh my God,
that's a great movie.
Paris is Burning is. I feel like that is just like a staple that if you haven't watched it and you are a gay person, go to Netflix, watch Paris is Burning. It is fantastic. I mean, some of the most quotable lines from gay pop culture ever are from that. Opulence, you own everything.
Well, I actually got to see some of them, some of those original houses and some of those Voguers who are also, some of them are fictionalized on Pose, did a fundraiser for ActUp in New York during one of the Pride weeks when I was visiting. So I got to go see them, and they performed like on stage for ActUp as a fundraiser, which was really cool. So I got to see like some of the extravaganzas and the various houses, and they were incredible.
Oh my God, that sounds freaking fantastic. And you said you saw one of the ninjas, right?
Yes, I think one of them was there. A couple of them. I mean, I don't remember exactly who was there. There were a whole bunch of them. There were like half a dozen that came out and performed for us as a fundraiser at a club, and it was really cool.
Yeah, and I think Hector Extravaganza passed away last year, and so at the end of the last episode of Pose, they had a little a quote from him, just to in memoriam kind of thing. It was nice.
Yeah, that movie. I mean, documentary. It's such a celebration of life, and also just deeply sad, and there's so much longing and like the hopes of like impossible dreams. It's really just a beautiful movie, and it's short. Like I think it's only like 80 minutes long. So park your butt down, watch this beautiful gem, like queer cinema.
It is great, absolutely.
And for a documentary, How to Survive a Plague.
Yes. Yeah, certainly. Definitely going to pick up some reading now. I have to get more into this nonfiction reading. I feel like it's important for me, but just whenever I sit down with a story, I just kind of want to escape into a fantasy land, so I usually do a lot of fiction.
Right. Like before we podcast, I'll finally get around to reading the book, but I've kind of put it off because it can be tough, reliving those times. It was weird because those times were some of the most amazing in my life, and they were horrible. Some of the worst and most horrible. Like I kind of define it as kind of like being like in the Justice League or the Avengers might be, that like you got to be a superhero, you did crazy things and saved lives, and people were shot all around you and died, and it's so weird. It's the most heightened emotions. It's like those of us who were involved have such an incredible sense of trauma from it, but also a huge sense of loss because it was, everything was so important.
Yeah, well, I mean, even as someone who didn't experience that and was, born after the worst times, just watching it, going back to Pose, there was a part where they were going to like a mass grave, and I didn't know that was necessarily a thing. Like it just never. It never came to me that was a reality for people, or that these people didn't have families and so they weren't getting marked graves and they were just being put into a box and buried with a bunch of other people. Like, and during watching the show, like I broke down and I was just saying, I mean, I was bawling, and my husband was like, "What's wrong?" And I just kept saying, like, "This isn't fair. It's not fair for these people." But I mean, I'm watching a fictional show about something that happened 20-something years ago. Right. But just for me screaming, this is not fair. This is not fair. I can't believe that was actually a reality for anybody. And the fact that you lived through it and you could still, tell these stories. It's got to be difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you for the stories, David. I think you're amazing. That's actually.
Thank you, honey.
This was actually really. Love you too.
And I've always wanted to chat with you. I hear you all the time.
Thank you.
I'm really happy we were able to get together for this discussion. And hopefully it's not a one-time thing. I think we should definitely come back to this at some point. All right. Well, I think we could wrap up.
Cool.
All right. Cool. Well, thank you guys for joining us, and thank you.
Happy Pride.
Happy Pride, everybody.
Thanks, James. Happy Pride. Thanks, James. This is great.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.
How's it going?
It's alright, how are you?
I'm good.
Hey there.
Hello.
I have a miserable cold right now, so don't mind me. Well, I'm starting to get over it basically, but I figure if I sound more like Harvey Fierstein, that's kind of appropriate, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's perfect.
Although I just told my best stories, but
Yeah.
It's funny because I've been looking at your icon this whole time, so I've been imagining that panda, like, talking with your voice.
Yeah.
that's funny.
This is an emoji.
And
Nice.
Can I ask, like, what is the panda? Where's the panda?
and I told you I have a weird hobby. I ride roller coasters, and our group did a tour of China. And in Chengdu, China is a panda sanctuary. So one of our non-coaster days, we went to the panda sanctuary, and I paid $300 for like 2 minutes to hold a panda and take lots and lots of pictures. It went to the sanctuary though, so it was good. But it was like cool. I mean, where else can you hold a panda? Like, how cool is that?
Is that
I've
like
got
a
a,
blue
like-
jumpsuit you had to wear?
No, it's not a jumpsuit. They made us wear like smock, like a raincoat kind of thing, like a plastic thing, and booties and gloves, theoretically to protect the panda from any stuff we might have.
Yeah.
But realistically, I think it was because they didn't want it to shit or piss on us.
Nice.
So I have a weird question. Like, what does a panda smell like? Like, if you're in the vicinity of a panda, is it just like this weird like fur smell, like a musky, weird bear smell?
I don't honestly think I really noticed, to be honest.
It has a clean smell.
It seemed just whatever. Like, I didn't really notice, to be honest. But I mean, again, it was literally like 2.5 minutes. Like,
I see.
they literally they have it done like a conveyor belt. Like, one person sits down, they put the panda on their lap. Then if they want a picture with another person, like your partner or whatever, you sit next to them. They take pictures with both of you. They move them over, and the person gets up, and you go back and forth like this, 50 in an hour. It's like crazy.
I see. I only ask because like my theory is the more adorable and majestic a creature is, like the worse it has to smell. It's like my parents went whale watching like a few years ago, and there was a whale that breached near them, like a humpback whale, and they said the smell that roiled off it was just horrific. And I was like, I never thought about that, but yeah, whales probably don't have a pleasant odor.
I've done that and I didn't smell it, but also I think part of it might be, remember that they have this panda there for that purpose, so I'm sure they clean the shit out of it.
Yeah.
Literally and figuratively.
Nice.